In the snowy Cascade Mountains, a betrayed Navy SEAL lived where silence felt safer than love. Ezra Caldwell fixed frozen power lines for a living, but he could not repair the place inside him that had gone cold. Then, during a whiteout storm, he heard a weak scratching beneath a fallen fir tree near a sealed cabin. A starving German shepherd looked up at him through the snow, one injured paw trapped, his eyes still guarding something no one had come back for. Ezra named him Frost, not knowing the dog was tied to a dead veteran's promise, a missing will, and land others were rushing to sell. Soon, Ezra would have to choose between following orders, protecting his job, or standing beside a dog the world had reduced to paperwork. Stay with this story. Tell us where you're watching from. And if Frost's journey touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers. Ezra Caldwell lived where winter did not knock before entering. It came down from the Cascade ridges like an old god with white hands, pressing its palms against the windows, burying the road, swallowing fence posts, smoothing every sharp thing under snow until the world looked gentle enough to trust. Ezra knew better. At 49, he had learned that the softest things could still cover a grave. Snow, silence, a woman's goodbye spoken without anger, a wedding ring left beside the sink like a coin for a ferryman. His cabin sat alone on a shoulder of mountain above Cedar Hollow, Washington, tucked between fir trees so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. It was not a beautiful cabin in the way vacation brochures understood beauty. No carved welcome sign, no string lights, no rocking chair positioned for sunsets. It was square, weather-beaten, practical, and stubborn, much like the man who lived inside it. Ezra kept it clean, not warm exactly. Warmth invited comfort, and comfort invited memories. He kept the stove running low, enough to keep the pipes from freezing, enough to keep himself from becoming foolish. His boots stood in a straight line beside the door. His tools hung on the wall by size and use. His dishes dried upside down on a towel that had seen better decades. There were no framed wedding photos left. There had been once. Ezra and Claire Caldwell standing outside a courthouse, both of them laughing at something now lost to time. Claire had been bright in the way a kitchen window was bright on Sunday morning. Ezra had loved her in the only way he understood then, by fixing things, paying bills, checking locks, driving in storms, standing between her and whatever danger he could name. But the danger that took her from him had not kicked in the door. It had arrived quietly, through distance, through loneliness, through the long, disciplined absences of a man who had survived war, but had never quite come home from it. When Claire finally left with another man 2 years earlier, she had not screamed. Ezra almost wished she had. A scream gave a man something to brace against. Instead, she had said, "You made it back, Ezra, but you never returned." Since then, he had not shouted. He had not begged. He had not broken furniture or haunted bars or chased after answers that would only bruise him twice. He had simply narrowed his life until nothing inside it could surprise him. Work helped. After leaving the Navy, after the years that had carved SEAL habits deep into his bones, Ezra became a winterline maintenance technician for a mountain utility company. It was dangerous work, lonely work, the kind of work that asked a man to climb steel and timber while the wind tried to peel him from the earth. He liked it more than he admitted. High-voltage lines did not ask how he slept. Frozen transformers did not care whether he felt empty. A fallen conductor did not look at him across a kitchen and ask why love felt like waiting outside a locked room. Out there, in the storm, every problem had weight, direction, voltage, distance. A man could diagnose it, repair it, report it, move on. That night, the radio cracked alive just as Ezra was tightening the straps on his insulated utility jacket. The jacket was old company issue, yellow faded toward mustard, with reflective strips across the chest and sleeves. Beneath it, he wore the olive drab combat shirt he still favored. Snug through the torso, camouflage sleeves worn pale at the elbows, dark horizontal bands at the upper arms. It was not nostalgia. At least, that was what he told himself. It fit well. It moved well. It had survived things. "Caldwell?" came Pearl Danvers's voice through the handheld radio. "You copy?" Ezra lifted it from the workbench. "Copy." Cedar Hollow feeder dropped again. "I'm seeing outages from mile marker 21 through 26. Wind is climbing. You need to check the auxiliary line before the county closes that road." Pearl's voice always sounded like it had been sharpened on a whetstone. She managed operations from the utility station down in Rusk Falls, a woman in her late 50s with cropped steel-gray hair, pale eyes, and a spine that seemed personally offended by slouching. Men half her age softened their tone when she entered a room, not because she asked them to, but because Pearl Danvers carried procedure like a badge and grief like a concealed blade. Her husband had been a line worker, too. Years before, in a storm not unlike this one, a man had left a post without logging it properly. A small mistake, people said afterward, a human mistake, but small human mistakes had a way of growing teeth in winter. Pearl's husband never made it home. Since then, procedure was not paperwork to Pearl. It was a rope tied around the waist of every person who walked into weather. "I'm rolling now," Ezra said. "You have a 2-hour window at most. No detours. No improvising." A faint smile touched the corner of Ezra's mouth, though there was no humor in it. "You telling me that because you think I improvise?" "I'm telling you because men with quiet voices make the worst decisions when they think nobody's watching." That almost earned a real laugh. Almost. "Copy," he said. He clipped the radio to his shoulder, took his yellow work light from its hook, and stepped outside. The storm met him hard. Snow blew sideways through the beam of his headlamp, wild and silver, each flake visible for half a heartbeat before vanishing into the dark. The firs around the cabin bent and groaned. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch cracked with the sound of a rifle shot, then vanished into the wind's long howl. Ezra climbed into his utility truck and started down the mountain road. The tires moved slowly, chains biting into packed snow. The dashboard glowed dim green. The heater pushed tired warmth against his gloves. In the passenger seat lay a coil of rope, bolt cutters, a folded thermal blanket, and his dented yellow work light with black tape wrapped around the handle. He had carried that light for years. It had been dropped from ladders, knocked against steel, half buried in mud, and once briefly stolen by a raccoon that apparently had ambitions in electrical maintenance. Ezra had respected the animal's initiative. The road to Cedar Hollow narrowed after the old quarry turnoff. Summer people rarely came this far. In winter, only utility crews, county plows, and the truly stubborn had reason to be there. Snowbanks rose on either side like the walls of a white trench. Above them, power lines vanished and reappeared in the moving dark. He found the first fault near mile marker 23, a sagging line, ice-loaded but intact. He logged it, checked the pole number, and moved on. Pearl came through the radio again. "Status?" "Line's heavy but holding, heading toward the auxiliary spur." "Don't linger. Wind gusts are hitting 50. "I noticed." "I mean it, Caldwell." He looked through the windshield at snow whipping across the road like pale smoke. "I know." There was a pause. Then Pearl's voice softened by a fraction, which for her was practically a hymn. "There are people up there without heat." Ezra's gloved hand tightened on the wheel. "Then I'll get it done." Cedar Hollow appeared not as a town, but as a scattering of darker shapes behind trees, old cabins, unused tracks, a collapsed shed, a narrow road that had once served a handful of veterans who wanted to be left alone but not forgotten. That was how the place had been described to him when he first joined the utility company. Left alone, but not forgotten. Ezra had thought then that it sounded like a bargain worth making. The auxiliary line ran behind a timbered property marked by a weather-beaten sign half buried in snow. He could just make out the words, "Cedar Hollow Trust," beneath a crust of ice. Beyond it stood a smaller log structure, not the main cabin, but a secondary building set back near the trees. Its roof sagged under snow. Boards crossed one window. Another window had cracked in a spiderweb pattern, catching the beam of his headlights like dead ice. Ezra parked, stepped out, and was immediately swallowed by wind. He moved with practiced economy, shoulders low, boots planted wide. The harness over his jacket creaked as he walked toward the pole box. His work light cut a yellow tunnel through the white. The auxiliary disconnect stood near the side of the abandoned structure, half hidden by drift. He cleared snow from the panel and frowned. The cutout had not failed from wind. The switch housing showed signs of being handled recently. Not fresh enough to prove anything, maybe, but not old either. He leaned closer, gloved fingers brushing ice from the metal. Then he heard it. A scrape. Faint. Almost lost beneath the storm. Ezra froze. He turned his head, listening. There it was again. Not the creak of timber. Not ice dropping from branches. Something deliberate, weak. A dragging, scratching sound from beyond the cabin near the dark bulk of a fallen fir. Ezra lifted the work light. "Anybody out there?" he called. The storm answered first, loud and mocking. Then came a sound so small it seemed ashamed of itself. A low whine. Ezra moved toward it. The fallen fir lay across the snow behind the cabin, its crown tangled with broken branches. One heavy limb had punched deep into a drift near the back steps. At first, Ezra saw nothing but black needles, white snow, and the rough brown body of the tree. Then the beam caught an eye. Amber. Still. Watching. Ezra crouched. Under the branches, half buried in snow, lay a German shepherd. Male. Large frame, though starvation had carved him down until the shoulders looked too sharp beneath the coat. His fur was black across the back like a saddle, rich tan along the chest and legs, but snow had frosted his muzzle, ears, and spine until he looked ancient, some winter guardian from an old tale, brought low by a careless forest. One front leg was trapped at an awkward angle beneath a branch. The dog did not thrash when Ezra came closer. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. His body trembled violently, but his gaze stayed clear, fixed on Ezra with a terrible intelligence, as if he had been waiting to judge the next human who found him. "Easy," Ezra said. The word came out rough. He could go days without using that tone. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, Caldwell." Pearl answered immediately. "Go." "I found an injured dog near the Cedar Hollow auxiliary structure, large German shepherd, trapped under a fallen tree. I need animal rescue or county assistance." Static chewed the channel. Then Pearl said, "Repeat that?" "You heard me." "Caldwell, that road is minutes from closure, and we still have customers without power." "I'm aware." "Is the line secured?" "Not yet." Another blast of static. Then Pearl's voice came back hard. "You secure the electrical fault first, mark the animal's location, and call it in. That is the order." Ezra looked at the dog. The shepherd's breath came in shallow bursts. Snow gathered on his eyelashes. His injured leg gave one small tremor, and the dog's jaw tightened, not in aggression, but in restraint. He was holding pain inside himself with discipline Ezra recognized. That was the problem, recognition. "Animal may not survive the wait," Ezra said. "People may not have heat if you delay." The words landed clean. Pearl was not wrong. That made them harder to hate. Ezra looked back toward the panel, looked at the line, looked at the dog. There were rules for storms, rules for fallen trees. Rules for electrical systems that could turn a careless body into smoke. There were procedures written because people had died before someone thought to write them down. And then there was this creature under a tree, silent as a soldier who had learned not to cry out because no one came when he did. The dog shifted his gaze from Ezra's face to the work light in his hand. His left ear stood tall. The right, no, the left ear, Ezra saw now, bent slightly at the tip, an old injury or old habit giving him a lopsided dignity. For one absurd second, the dog looked less like a victim than a commander displeased with the speed of his rescue. Ezra exhaled. "Pearl," he said into the radio, "I'm going to stabilize the dog and clear the limb. Then I'll reassess the line." "Caldwell." "I heard your order." "Then follow it." He stared at the shepherd. The dog stared back. Ezra thought of Claire at the kitchen sink, saying he never returned. He thought of all the times he had chosen the mission because the mission had edges and people did not. He thought of how easy it was to call mercy a distraction when mercy had eyes. "No," he said quietly. There was a silence on the radio so cold it nearly joined the storm. Pearl's voice dropped. "You understand what you're risking?" Ezra slid the radio back onto his shoulder. "Yes." He set the work light in the snow, angled the beam under the tree, and pulled the folding saw from his kit. The work was slow, careful. Too much pressure on the wrong branch could shift the trunk and worsen the dog's injury. Ezra cut smaller limbs first, speaking in low fragments as he worked. "Easy. Stay with me. Don't bite me unless you've got a better plan." The shepherd blinked once, solemn and unimpressed. "Fair?" Ezra muttered. It took 15 minutes to clear enough space. 15 minutes in a storm could become a lifetime. Twice Pearl called. Twice he ignored the radio. He used a short pry bar to lift the trapped limb just enough to free the dog's leg, then slid one arm beneath the animal's chest and another under his hindquarters. The shepherd made one sound then. Not a yelp, not quite. A broken breath pressed through clenched teeth. Ezra paused. "I know." And he did. Not the same pain, never the same, but enough to know that dignity sometimes hurt more than the wound. He eased the dog out from under the tree and onto the thermal blanket. Up close, the shepherd smelled of snow, wet fur, old wood, and fear held under iron control. His body was lighter than it should have been, too light for his frame. His ribs moved beneath Ezra's hands like the slats of a damaged crate. Ezra wrapped him in the blanket, then stripped off his outer utility jacket and folded it over the dog's body. The cold struck Ezra immediately through the combat shirt beneath, needling into his arms, but he barely noticed. The dog's eyes fluttered. Snow clung to his muzzle, turning the black fur white around the mouth and chin. "You look like you picked a fight with winter and lost," Ezra said. The shepherd's gaze moved toward him. Ezra did not know why he said the next word. Maybe because every creature deserved a name when the world was trying to erase it. Maybe because dog sounded too much like item or case or problem. Maybe because the snow had already named him and Ezra was only translating. "Frost," he said. The dog's eyes opened a little wider. It was not magic. Ezra did not believe in that sort of thing. It was probably tone, breath, coincidence, a tired animal responding to sound. Still, the name hung there between them. Frost, a small white banner in a dark war. Ezra carried him to the truck. The shepherd did not struggle, though his head lifted once as they passed the cabin, amber eyes turning toward the boarded window. A faint vibration moved through his chest, not quite a growl, not quite grief. Ezra noticed. But he did not stop, not yet. Inside the truck, he laid Frost across the passenger seat and used strips from an emergency wrap with 2 narrow pieces of scrapwood to stabilize the injured front leg. It was ugly, temporary, and better than nothing. Frost trembled under the thermal blanket. Ezra turned the heater higher and aimed the vents toward him. Pearl's voice burst through the radio again. Caldwell, answer me now." Ezra picked it up. "Dog is extracted. I'm transporting him to Lillian Voss's clinic." "You are abandoning an active outage?" "I'm leaving the site marked. I'll send coordinates and panel photos. The auxiliary cutout appears manually opened or recently handled. Main hazard is noted." "That is not your decision to make." Ezra looked at Frost. The dog's breathing was shallow but steadier now. One paw twitched against the seat, claws clicking faintly. "It became my decision when I found him under that tree." Pearl's voice hardened. "You may be facing disciplinary action." "Understood." "I don't think you do. If that line drops and someone up there loses heat, then send Barstow from the south route if he can get through," Ezra said. "I'll guide him on the fault location, but this dog won't last long enough for a committee." He expected Pearl to shout. She did not. That was somehow worse. When she spoke again, her voice was low and controlled. "You always this calm when you're being reckless?" Ezra put the truck in gear. "Only when I'm sure." He drove. The road down from Cedar Hollow had become a white throat closing around them. Snow erased the tire tracks almost as soon as he made them. Branches leaned low. The truck's headlights caught only a few yards at a time, as if the world had shrunk to a tunnel of wind, glass, and breath. Frost lay on the seat beside him, wrapped in Ezra's jacket. Every few minutes, Ezra glanced over to check the rise and fall of his ribs. "Stay with me," he said once. The words filled the cab and startled him. He had said them before, long ago, in places hotter than this, louder than this, beneath skies that did not care what men promised each other. But tonight they felt different, not like command, not like habit, like a plea that had escaped before he could lock it down. Frost's ear twitched. Ezra gripped the wheel harder. The clinic was 37 minutes away in good weather. In this storm, it might have been across an ocean. He drove anyway, slow and relentless, the old work light rolling softly on the floorboard where he had tossed it. Halfway down the mountain, the radio crackled again. Pearl. "Barstow is rerouting," she said. "County Plow says they can keep the lower pass open for another hour. After that, nobody moves." Ezra waited. Pearl added grudgingly, "Voss has been notified. She says bring him to the side entrance." Ezra's throat tightened in a way he disliked. "Copy," he said. "And Caldwell?" "Yes?" "You and I are not finished." For the first time that night, Ezra almost smiled. "Didn't figure we were." The clinic lights appeared through the storm like small square moons. Ezra pulled to the side entrance, killed the engine, and for a moment did not move. He sat there with one hand on the wheel and one hand resting lightly on the blanket over Frost's ribs. The shepherd opened his eyes. Not fully. Just enough. Ezra looked back at him. He did not say, "You're safe." He did not trust the word yet. Safe was a bridge too many storms had washed out. Instead, he said the only thing that felt honest. "I found you." Frost held his gaze. Then, with the last of his strength, the dog shifted his injured body just enough to press his muzzle against Ezra's wrist. It was a small touch, barely anything, a feather against a locked door. But Ezra sat very still, as if some ancient judge had placed a hand on his shoulder and asked him what kind of man he intended to be now. Outside, Dr. Lillian Voss opened the clinic door, her gray hair tucked under a wool cap, her teal scrub top visible beneath a heavy coat. Warm light spilled onto the snow behind her. "Ezra," she called, "bring him in." Ezra gathered Frost carefully in both arms. The dog was too light. That angered him more than it should have. He carried Frost through the side door without looking back at the storm. Behind him, the truck sat running, hazard lights blinking red into the white night. Ahead, the clinic smelled of antiseptic, wet towels, coffee, and the fragile hope of places where broken creatures were not yet counted out. Pearl's warning still hung in his mind. Discipline, reports, consequences. Men like Ezra did not pretend consequences were unfair simply because they hurt. But as he laid Frost gently on the examination table, as Lillian moved in with calm hands and serious eyes, Ezra understood something he had not allowed himself to understand in years. Some duties came printed on work orders. Others waited under fallen trees, silent and freezing, daring a man to remember he still had a soul. Dr. Lillian Voss did not waste words when an animal was hurting. She met Ezra at the side entrance with a towel over one arm and the kind of calm that did not ask permission from panic. The clinic behind her was small, warm, and brightly lit, smelling of antiseptic, wet fur, old coffee, and the faint medicinal sweetness of heated blankets. "Table 2, she said. Ezra carried Frost inside. The German shepherd felt too light in his arms. That was the first thing Lillian noticed, too. Her eyes moved from the dog's sharp shoulders to the awkward splint around the front leg, then to the snow melting off Ezra's combat shirt and onto the tile. "You stabilized him yourself?" "Best I could." "Better than most." She touched the splint gently. "Not pretty." "Wasn't trying for pretty." "Good. Pretty has ruined more emergency work than laziness." Her voice was dry but not unkind. Lillian was 55, with short silver-gray hair tucked messily under her wool cap, and pale eyes behind narrow glasses. She had the square, grounded build of someone who had spent her life lifting large, frightened animals onto examination tables and convincing them somehow that the world was not ending. A black veterinary stethoscope hung around her neck, patched with a strip of old tape bearing her name in handwriting, half rubbed away. Ezra lowered Frost onto the padded table. Frost did not snap. He did not thrash. His body trembled, but his eyes stayed open, following every hand, every movement, every door. When Lillian bent close, she did not reach for him immediately. She lowered herself until her face was almost level with his. "Hello, old man," she said softly. "I'm going to help. You don't have to approve of it, but I'd appreciate cooperation." Frost blinked at her. Ezra stood near the dog's head, one hand resting on the blanket. He had no idea whether the touch helped Frost or himself. Probably both. Probably neither. Men like him like to pretend there was a difference. Lillian worked quickly. She checked gums, temperature, heart rhythm, limb response. She ran her fingers along Frost's ribs, his shoulders, the injured front leg. When Frost's muscles tightened, she paused, waited for his breath to settle, then continued. "Front left," she said. "Possible fracture, joint displacement too. He's dehydrated, underfed, chilled through. How long was he out there?" "Don't know." "Hours?" Ezra looked at the dog's sunken flanks. "Longer." Lillian's mouth tightened. She did not say what both of them understood. Winter was not a patient hunter. It did not need to hurry. A young assistant brought warm fluids, bandage supplies, and a portable scanner. Lillian gave clipped instructions, each one clean and practical. Ezra stepped back when needed, forward when Frost's eyes searched the room. He found himself becoming an object in the clinic's rhythm. Not owner, not bystander, not rescuer exactly. A post the injured animal kept checking for position. The first X-rays came up on the monitor 20 minutes later. Lillian studied them with her arms folded. "Not shattered," she said. "That's the good news. Hairline crack here, mild dislocation at the joint, soft tissue trauma. Serious enough that he shouldn't be transported casually. But with treatment, rest, and no foolish heroics, he has a chance." Ezra looked down at Frost. "Hear that? No foolish heroics." The dog's amber eyes shifted toward him, unimpressed. Lillian noticed and gave a brief snort. "He thinks you should take your own advice." Ezra almost smiled. Almost. Frost was given fluids, pain relief, and a proper brace. He lay beneath a warming blanket with his injured leg supported, breathing steadier now. His left ear, the one with the bent tip, twitched every time the hallway door opened. Lillian watched him for a long moment. "He's trained," she said. Ezra looked at her. "You can tell that already?" "I spent 8 years in Oregon working with retired service dogs and veteran support animals. You learn to see patterns." She nodded toward Frost. "He's in pain, exhausted, and frightened, but he isn't reacting like a stray who has only survived on instinct. He's controlling himself, watching doors, tracking voices. When your radio crackled earlier, he tensed but didn't panic. When you moved closer, his breathing slowed." Ezra glanced at the dog. "Maybe he just likes my charming personality." Lillian gave him a flat look. "Right," Ezra said. "Probably not." "He has attached you to safety," Lillian said. "Temporarily, at least." The word temporarily should have been a relief. Ezra did not need another attachment. He did not need a creature deciding that his shadow meant shelter. He had built a life around not being needed in soft ways. Need was easy when it wore a uniform or came as a work order. Need with eyes was a different beast. The scanner beeped when Lillian passed it over Frost's shoulder. "There we are," she murmured. A partial chip record appeared on the small screen. The data loaded slowly, then stopped halfway through with an error code. Lillian adjusted the scanner and tried again. Only pieces came through. Frost, Guardian Placement, Cedar Hollow Trust. Ezra felt the name settle over the room. Frost. So the snow had not named him after all. Ezra had only found the word already buried there. Lillian looked from the scanner to Ezra. "You said you found him near Cedar Hollow?" "Behind a secondary cabin. Fallen fir pinned him." "Secondary cabin?" "Looked boarded up. Auxiliary line ran beside it." Lillian printed the partial record. The machine buzzed and clicked like an irritated insect. She tore off the paper and held it in both hands. "Guardian Placement wasn't a normal adoption label, at least not in the programs I worked with," she said. "It usually meant the animal had a formal care arrangement, sometimes for service dogs whose handlers passed away, sometimes for support animals placed with veterans through a trust." Ezra looked at Frost again. The shepherd's eyes were half closed now, but his head remained angled toward the door. Even sedated, even warmed, even safe enough for the moment, he was still on watch. "He wasn't dumped randomly," Ezra said. "No," Lillian replied. "I don't think he was." The clinic grew quiet around that thought. Outside, snow tapped the windows in soft bursts. Inside, the warming machine hummed. Somewhere in the back room, a small dog barked twice and then reconsidered its courage. Ezra reached for the printout, then stopped. "Can I take a copy?" "I'll make one, and I'll document the condition he arrived in." Lillian's voice shifted, becoming more formal. "But Ezra, if this connects to a trust or formal placement, you need to be careful. Don't remove anything from that property. Don't decide you're the law, because you were the first one there." His jaw tightened. "I know the difference." "I know you do in theory." She looked over her glasses at him. Men who carry wounded things through storms sometimes get romantic ideas about rules. "I'm not romantic." That may be the saddest false statement I've heard this month. Ezra had no answer to that. He stayed at the clinic until almost dawn, not because anyone asked him to. Lillian told him twice that he could go home and sleep. Ezra nodded both times and remained in the chair beside the recovery area, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped. Frost slept in pieces. Every time a truck passed outside, he stirred. Every time Lillian's assistant walked by in squeaking shoes, his eyes opened. Once, near 5 in the morning, the radio on Ezra's shoulder gave a small burst of static. Frost lifted his head. Not fast, not in panic, but with effort, as if his body remembered that sound from another life. Ezra immediately muted the radio. Frost's eyes moved to him. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then Frost lowered his head back onto the blanket. It was a small exchange, easily missed. No miracle, no thunder. Just a man pressing a button so a dog could rest. But it landed in Ezra's chest with strange weight. Claire had once told him he could handle a crisis better than a conversation. She had meant it as grief, not cruelty. He had taken it as accusation because accusations were easier. In the clinic's pale morning light, with an injured German shepherd finally sleeping because he had silenced a radio, Ezra wondered if maybe connection was not always a speech. Maybe sometimes it was noticing what sound hurt another living thing and choosing to make the world quieter. By sunrise, the storm had loosened its grip, but not released the mountain. The sky hung low and pewter gray. Plows had carved narrow lanes through the main road, leaving walls of snow on both sides. Lillian handed Ezra a folder before he left. Medical intake, X-ray notes, chip scan copy. I also called someone. Ezra paused. Who? Mara Whitcomb, attorney. She does volunteer work for veterans, trusts, disability benefits. Messy cases nobody wants because the paperwork smells like wet cardboard and despair. Sounds cheerful. She's good. Lillian's expression sharpened. If Cedar Hollow Trust is real and Frost was left there in this condition, you need someone who understands more than dogs and utility lines. Ezra took the folder. I'm going back to finish the report. Of course you are. You say that like it's a diagnosis. With you, most things are. He stepped outside into a morning so white it seemed unfinished. Cedar Hollow was quieter by daylight. The storm had scrubbed the world clean, but not kindly. Trees bent under snow. The old track to the property had been half cleared by wind and half buried again. Ezra parked near the sign and sat for a moment, reading it properly now. Cedar Hollow Trust. The letters were carved into weathered wood, not flashy, not commercial. Someone had made that sign to last, then stopped maintaining it before it could keep its promise. Ezra got out with his camera, work light, tool belt, and the folder tucked inside his truck. Pearl had already left 2 messages on his phone and 1 official notice in his company inbox. He had not opened the notice yet. A man could only invite so many wolves into the room before breakfast. The secondary cabin stood behind the main structure, low and hunched beneath snow. Boards crossed the front door. A sign nailed to the wood read, "Unsafe structure. Do not enter." The sign was old, but the screws holding it were not as rusted as the hinges. Ezra noticed that. He noticed everything when he did not want to feel. He walked the perimeter first, photographing the doorway, the broken window, the fallen fur, the drag marks where he had pulled Frost clear. Near the back steps, the snow had blown thin enough to reveal scratches in the lower part of the door, not claw marks from years ago. Fresh gouges. Desperate, repeated, low to the ground. Ezra crouched. A bowl sat just inside a gap where the board had warped away from the frame. The water inside was frozen solid, a small white disk in the metal. Beside it lay a few pieces of dry dog food, swollen from damp, then frozen again. A folded army blanket lay farther in, gray-green and stiff with cold. Ezra did not touch any of it. He took pictures, close, wide, with the door, with the sign, with the line box in the frame. Then he called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher transferred him twice before a deputy came on, voice young but steady. "This is Deputy Rowan Hale." Ezra explained who he was, where he was, and what he had found. He kept emotion out of it. Location, time, condition, possible animal neglect, possible property issue connected to a trust, recent utility cutout irregularity. Rowan listened without interrupting. "You're at the site now?" the deputy asked. Yes. Do not enter the structure. Do not remove anything. Photograph only what is visible from outside. If there's an immediate electrical hazard, address that and document it before and after. Understood. We've got roads still rough between you and us. I can probably get there later today if the plows hold. Until then, preserve the scene. Ezra looked at the boarded door. There's something under the floor. A pause. You entered? No. Viewed through a gap near the rear boards. Metallic corner under warped floorboards. Could be nothing. Then treat it like evidence until we know it's nothing. That Ezra could respect. He moved to the auxiliary panel next. Snow had packed into the seam. He cleared it carefully and photographed the housing. Under daylight, the irregularity was clearer. The cutout had been opened cleanly. No scorch marks, no storm damage, no snapped hardware. Someone had disabled the auxiliary feed before the worst of the weather arrived. Ezra felt the first real shape of unease. A dog left inside or near a sealed cabin. A heat source cut. A warning sign newer than the building's decay. A chip record tied to a truss. It was not proof of anything yet. He knew better than to stack assumptions until they looked like truth. But facts, like tracks in snow, had direction. He finished the electrical safety notes, sent Pearl the required photos, then moved toward the rear of the cabin. The warped board near the back had bowed outward just enough to show a slice of interior darkness. Ezra crouched, aimed his worklight, and saw dust, old leaves, the edge of a floor plank lifted by damp. And beneath it, tucked partly under the warped boards, a corner of metal. Not shiny, old, gray-black. A box, maybe. His hand moved toward the gap by instinct. He stopped. Lillian's voice came back to him. Don't decide you're the law because you were the first one there. Ezra withdrew his hand. For a while, he simply crouched there in the snow, staring at that dull metal corner. It was strange how an object could feel heavy without being touched, like a sealed mouth, like the last cold tooth of a buried story. He called Deputy Rowan again. Then he called Lillian. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you didn't pry up a floor. I didn't pry up a floor. That answer was too quick. I found a metal box, visible through a gap. I'm not touching it. Deputy says preserve scene. Good. I'm proud of you. Don't make me revoke that. I need the attorney's number. Mara, I'll connect you. Mara Whitcomb joined by video 10 minutes later, her face appearing on Ezra's phone inside a square of weak mountain signal. She looked younger than her voice, early 40s with chestnut hair tied low and tired brown eyes that seemed to read footnotes on people's faces. Behind her were shelves of files and a crooked mug that said, "Due process is a verb." "You're Ezra Caldwell?" she asked. "Yes." "Lillian says you found a dog with a partial truss chip and now possibly a hidden box at the related property." "That's the plain version." "I like plain versions." She leaned closer to the camera. "Show me what you can without entering." Ezra turned the phone, moving slowly over the boarded door, the warning sign, the bowl, the blanket, the claw marks, the panel, the rear gap, the visible metal corner beneath the floor. Mara did not dramatize anything. She did not gasp. She did not say, "This changes everything." People who said that too soon usually wanted attention more than answers. Instead, she asked, "Can you place a marker outside without disturbing the interior?" "Yes." "Use something visible." Photograph the marker in relation to the back step and the panel. Then cover the gap from outside if snow can blow in, but don't block access. Ezra used a strip of orange utility tape and a small stake from his truck. He marked the exterior ground near the rear opening, took photos, then leaned a loose scrap of plywood outside the gap to keep the wind from driving snow into the exposed area. He did not nail it, did not seal it, did not improve the scene into uselessness. Mara watched the whole process through the stuttering video feed. "Good," she said. "Boring and careful. My favorite kind of useful." "I get called boring more than useful." "Then you've been around unimaginative people." For some reason, that stayed with him. After the call ended, Ezra stood behind the sealed cabin with snow gathering on his shoulders. The woods were quiet now, but not peaceful. The fallen fir lay where frost had been trapped, its broken limbs spread like the ribs of some giant beast. He imagined Frost inside that boarded structure, hearing the wind sharpen, feeling the heat vanish, scratching at a door no one opened. A muscle tightened in Ezra's jaw. He forced himself back to work. By afternoon, the official notice from Pearl could no longer be ignored. It sat in his inbox with a subject line so crisp it seemed to wear a uniform. Preliminary disciplinary review. Incident response delay. Ezra opened it inside his truck while the heater blew damp warmth against his boots. The notice stated that he had deviated from assigned outage response protocol, delayed inspection of the Cedar Hollow auxiliary line, and transported an animal for emergency care without authorization during an active weather event. It requested his signed acknowledgement before end of day. Not admission, technically, but close enough to carry weight later. Ezra read it twice. His thumb hovered over the acknowledgement button. Signing would be easy. Men like him had signed worse things. Reports that flattened chaos into tidy sentences. Statements that turned fear into operational stress. Forms that made grief fit inside a box. He had learned long ago that accepting blame quickly made rooms quieter. Then he looked through the windshield at the sealed cabin, the boarded door, the claw marks, the frozen bowl, the manually opened cutout, the marked place near the back where a metal box waited beneath the floor. Ezra lowered the phone. Not this time. He wrote a response instead. Acknowledgement pending clarification of site conditions. Additional observations attached. Possible manual disconnection of auxiliary heat feed prior to storm. Injured dog located at Cedar Hollow Trust structure. County deputy notified. Evidence preserved. He attached the photos. Then he sent it before he could become the older version of himself, the one that swallowed truth because silence felt safer. The message left his phone with a soft whoosh. A ridiculous sound for a small act of rebellion. Ezra sat back. Snow slid from a branch above and fell across the windshield in a soft collapse. For a heartbeat, the world vanished behind white. Then the wipers dragged it aside. The cabin remained, sealed, watching, waiting. Ezra turned the truck toward the clinic, carrying no answers, only the shape of a question growing heavier by the mile. Why would someone seal a place meant for care, cut its heat before a storm, and leave a trained dog to vanish beneath winter? He did not know yet, but he had stopped pretending it was none of his business. Deputy Rowan Hale reached Cedar Hollow just after noon, when the mountain road had been opened by one narrow blade of county plow and a great deal of stubbornness. His cruiser came in slow, tires grinding through packed snow, headlights pale beneath the gray sky. He stepped out with a canvas evidence bag, a camera, and the careful expression of a man who knew that small rural calls sometimes grew teeth after everyone had already decided they were harmless. Rowan was younger than Ezra had expected from his voice. Early 30s, lean, clean-shaven, with dark hair pressed flat under a wool-lined sheriff's cap. His brown uniform was half hidden beneath a winter jacket, and his boots sank nearly to the ankle with every step. He did not carry himself like a man eager to prove authority. He carried himself like someone trying very hard not to damage the truth before he understood it. "Caldwell?" he asked. Ezra nodded. Rowan looked at the boarded cabin, the fallen fir, the orange utility tape marking the rear gap, then back at Ezra. "You touched anything since we spoke?" "No." "Entered the structure?" "No." "Moved the panel?" "Only cleared snow and photographed. The cutout was already open. Rowan studied him for a moment, perhaps weighing whether the former SEAL in front of him was the type who confused restraint with weakness. Ezra stared back without helping him decide. Finally, Rowan said, "Good. Let's keep it boring." A small square on Mara Whitcomb's video call lit up from Rowan's phone a few minutes later. She had insisted on being present virtually if the box was removed. Dr. Lillian Voss joined from her clinic office, still in teal scrubs beneath a gray fleece jacket, a pen tucked behind one ear, and the look of someone who had already told 3 animals and 2 humans to stop making poor choices before lunch. Mara's face appeared sharp and tired on the screen, chestnut hair tied low, her eyes moving over every corner of the scene. "Deputy Hale, before anything is lifted, please photograph the exterior, the gap, and the floor position from at least 3 angles." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "Counselor, are you always this charming before introductions?" "Only when evidence is about to become vulnerable." "I like her," Lillian said from her own square. Ezra stood aside and let them work. It was strange, watching other people approach the place where he had first felt the shape of something wrong. He had spent years being trained to enter first, decide fast, make the hard call, while others were still asking what the weather was doing. But this was not that kind of field. Here, speed could ruin more than hesitation. Rowan documented the scene. He photographed the warning sign, the frozen bowl visible through the warped boards, the old army blanket, the claw marks low on the door, the auxiliary panel, the cutout, the marked gap by the rear step. Then, with gloved hands and Ezra holding the work light steady outside, Rowan loosened the warped plank just enough to reach the object beneath. The metal box came free with a reluctant scrape. It was smaller than Ezra expected. Dark gray, dented at one corner, wrapped in oilcloth that had stiffened with age. For a moment it sat in Rowan's hands like something pulled from the belly of the mountain. Not treasure, not weapon, not miracle. Just a box. Plain as a lunch pail, heavy as an unanswered prayer. Rowan placed it on a clean tarp near the back step and photographed it again. "Seal intact?" Mara asked through the phone. "No lock," Rowan said. "Latch is rusted but closed, no obvious damage besides age." "Open it where everyone can see." Ezra watched Rowan ease the latch upward. The box opened with a dry click. Inside were papers wrapped in another layer of oilcloth, a small stack of photographs, 2 envelopes, a folded handwritten document, several thin contracts clipped together, and an old brass tag on a piece of broken leather. Rowan did not lift anything quickly. He photographed each layer, then removed the contents one by one, placing them on the tarp. Mara's voice came through the phone, softer now. "Can you angle the handwritten document toward the camera?" Rowan did. Ezra could see only pieces at first. A name, a date, a line written in careful, wavering script. "I, Amos Bellwether, being of sound intention." The wind moved through the trees behind them. Snow dusted the shoulders of Ezra's olive jacket. He had been cold for hours, but only then did he feel it inside his ribs. "Amos Bellwether," Lillian murmured. That name was in Frost's intake note? The partial chip record didn't show it, but I swear I've heard it tied to Cedar Hollow. Mara leaned toward her camera. "Deputy, keep that document flat. Don't fold or refold it if you can avoid it." Rowan gave her a dry look. "You do realize I have handled paper before?" "I trust you deeply, Deputy. I trust humidity less." One corner of Rowan's mouth twitched. Ezra did not smile. His eyes had caught on one of the photographs. An old man stood outside the same cabin in late autumn, before the roof sagged, before the windows were boarded, before the place looked like it had been sentenced to disappear. He wore a faded field jacket and a knit cap pulled low over white hair. One hand rested on the neck of a German shepherd standing beside him. The dog in the photograph was heavier, Stronger, his coat bright black and tan, his ears high except for the left one, which bent slightly at the tip. Frost, not buried in snow, not thin with hunger, not trembling beneath a fallen tree. Frost standing proud beside Amos Bellwether, looking at the camera with the solemn patience of a creature who had accepted a post and intended to hold it until relieved. Ezra reached toward the photograph, then stopped before his fingers touched it. Rowan noticed. "You can look after I bag it." Ezra nodded. He felt foolish for the impulse. A photograph was not a pulse. A dead man's hand on a dog's neck was not proof of love. But some images carried warmth long after the stove had gone out. This one did. They moved the contents to the cruiser for proper packaging, then down to the sheriff's office once the road allowed. Mara arrived in person by mid-afternoon, her parka dusted with snow, a burgundy scarf tucked close around her throat, and a leather satchel pressed under one arm like it contained the last sane thoughts in the county. She did not waste time on drama. She asked for copies. She checked the chain of custody form. She thanked Rowan once, sincerely, then immediately corrected the spelling of Bellwether on the intake sheet. Rowan stared at her. She stared back. He changed it. Ezra sat in a metal chair near the wall, hands folded, feeling as useful as a spare hinge. He knew how to climb frozen utility poles, stabilize a wounded animal, drive through whiteout without letting fear touch the wheel. But paper had its own wilderness, and Mara moved through it like a tracker reading prints no one else saw. The handwritten will was old but legible. Amos Bellwether had owned the Cedar Hollow property outright. He had no spouse, no children, and no close relatives involved in his care. He had placed the land, the secondary cabin, a modest account, and certain care contracts into a small trust connected to an organization called Fallen Harbor Home. The Vietnamese translation would be something like "My Am Liet Si," Mara said absently, reading. But the original name matters legally. Ezra leaned forward. What was it supposed to do? Mara traced a line with her capped pen without touching the page. Care for retired working dogs, military, veteran support, specialized assistance animals, especially when their handlers passed away and no family could take them. Lillian, who had joined them after closing 2 exam rooms early, folded her arms. That tracks with Frost's behavior. Mara kept reading. The clause that changed the room came halfway down the second page. Cedar Hollow property shall not be sold, leased for commercial development, or transferred for private profit for a period of 20 years, unless the animal care program housed thereon has been moved to an equivalent facility, subject to transparent oversight and veterinary certification. Rowan gave a low whistle. Mara did not look up. There's more. She turned the page. Frost, German Shepherd male, registered under Guardian Placement Record CHF7, shall be maintained as an individual living ward of the program, not liquidated, transferred for convenience, or treated as disposable property upon my death. No one spoke. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Outside the sheriff's office window, snow slid slowly from the roof in a soft white curtain. Ezra looked at the photograph again, now sealed in a clear sleeve on the table. Amos Bellwether's hand rested on Frost's neck. A simple gesture. Familiar? Possessive only in the way love was possessive when it promised, "I will not let the world misplace you." "Living ward," Lillian said quietly. "That's old-fashioned language, but intentional." "Very," Mara said. Ezra's mouth felt dry. So someone was supposed to take care of him. Yes? And instead he was under a tree. Mara closed the folder with care. That is what we need to understand without rushing to the wrong conclusion. He heard the caution in her voice. He respected it. He hated it anyway. Because Frost had not been a theory when Ezra found him. He had been ribs under wet fur. He had been shallow breath and an injured leg. He had been amber-eyed, deciding whether another human would leave him where Winter could finish the paperwork. Ezra stood. "Then it's yours now." Mara looked at him. "What is?" "The case, the trust, the will, whatever this is. I'm not a lawyer. I fix lines." "You found the dog." "I didn't adopt a legal mess." "No?" Mara said. "You interrupted one?" He turned toward the window. Snow had begun again, finer now, almost gentle. The world outside looked clean enough to lie. Mara's voice softened. "Ezra, I'm not asking you to become a crusader." "Good." "I'm saying dead men without family don't get many witnesses. Neither do dogs." He looked back at her. She did not push harder. That was what made the sentence land. She left it between them, a small coal under ash. Lillian broke the silence with practical mercy. "Frost is awake. He refused food until I moved his bowl where he could see the clinic door. Then he ate half." Ezra frowned. "Why?" "Because some trained dogs won't settle until they understand the exits, or until they know who is coming back." That should not have struck him. It did. Mara checked county property records that evening from Lillian's office because the sheriff's station internet moved with the speed of a sleepy mule. Ezra stood beside the exam room doorway while Frost rested inside a large recovery kennel, his braced front legs stretched on a pad, his muzzle gray-white beneath the warm lights. Mara sat at Lillian's desk, her teal pen tapping once against a printed deed. "There it is," she said. Ezra turned. "Cedar Hollow parcel transferred 9 months after Amos Bellwether's recorded passing," Mara said. "Buyer is Cascadia Alpine Development Group. Resort cabins, winter recreation, private access roads." The transfer packet includes a notarized signature from Amos authorizing preliminary sale discussions. Lillian's brows drew together. "After he died?" "No, the signature date is before his passing." Mara clicked another document open. "But that date falls after a medical filing indicating cognitive impairment severe enough to require oversight for major decisions." Ezra knew little about estate law, but he understood timing. Could he still sign? Maybe. Depends on capacity at that exact time, but this is where my neck hair gets unfriendly. Mara turned the screen toward them. "The signature is too clean?" Ezra studied it. Amos Bellwether, written in smooth blue ink. Elegant, steady, almost decorative. Then Mara placed a scan from the box beside it. A letter Amos had written around the same period. The words there wandered, trembled, recovered, then wandered again. Still clear enough to carry meaning, but not smooth, not elegant, not clean, Lillian whispered. "Oh." Mara leaned back. "Sometimes a false thing doesn't look messy. Sometimes it looks more perfect than the truth ever could." Ezra looked through the doorway at Frost. The dog was awake now, watching them, not whining, not asking, just watching, as if the room had become another doorway, and he had once again been assigned to guard it. Over the next hour, the box gave up more of Amos Bellwether's world. There were care contracts for 3 other dogs besides Frost, a bank letter showing a small trust account, handwritten notes about feed costs, winter heating, veterinary rotations, a list of names, not only dogs, but handlers, men and women who had come home from service carrying invisible weather, and animals who had learned to walk beside them through it. Amos had not built a grand institution. He had built something humble and stubborn, a place for the last loyal creatures of lonely people. Ezra found that harder to look at than any battlefield map. That night, he returned to the clinic instead of driving straight home. Lillian had left a chair beside Frost's kennel without comment. On the chair sat a printed sheet, medication schedule, feeding instructions, brace precautions, signs of distress to watch for. Ezra sat. Frost opened his eyes. "You look better," Ezra said. The dog did not appear convinced. "Fine. You look less like you lost a bar fight with a tree." Frost exhaled through his nose. Ezra took that as criticism. He read the care sheet twice, then a third time. He adjusted the water bowl because the edge was too close to the blanket. He checked that the brace was not pressing into the wrong place, exactly as Lillian had shown him. He did not coo. He did not call Frost baby. He did not make promises he had no right to make. He simply stayed. After a while, Frost shifted. Slowly, with effort, he extended his muzzle through the open front of the recovery kennel and rested it against the back of Ezra's hand. The touch was warm. Ezra looked down at him. In the photograph, Amos Bellwether's hand had rested on Frost's neck like a promise. Now Frost's muzzle rested on Ezra's hand like a question. "Are you the next one?" Ezra did not answer aloud. He was not ready for that kind of honesty, but he did not move his hand away. Later, Mara called. Her voice was quieter than before and more troubled. "I pulled older filings on Fallen Harbor Home. It began exactly the way Amos described. Small nonprofit, mostly veterans, volunteers, animal care placements, emergency funds. For years it looks clean, not rich, not polished, but real. And now the language changes. New management, asset optimization, legacy property review, administrative restructuring. They stopped writing about dogs by name and started writing about units, liabilities, and holdings." Ezra looked at Frost, asleep again with his bent-tipped ear relaxed against the blanket. "What does that mean?" "It means a place built to keep promises may have learned how to profit from forgetting them." Ezra closed his eyes. Outside the clinic windows, night had gathered over the snow. The Cascade ridges stood unseen beyond the dark, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere up there, Cedar Hollow waited under its white covering, sealed and silent. Ezra had wanted to hand the whole thing to Mara. Let the lawyer untie the knots. Let the deputy file the reports. Let the veterinarian heal the dog. Let the dead keep their own counsel. He was only a line worker, only a man who fixed what ice and wind damaged. But Frost's muzzle was still warm against the memory of his hand. And some lines, Ezra was beginning to understand, did not run between poles. Some ran between the living and the dead, between a promise and the one person stubborn enough to hear it humming beneath the floor. Fallen Harbor Home did not look like a place that had ever heard a dog breathe in its sleep. Its current office sat on the second floor of a renovated brick building in Rusk Falls, above a boutique tax firm and across from a cafe where people paid $5 for coffee with foam shaped like leaves. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and printer toner. A row of small potted plants stood along the windowsill, all the same height, all turned toward the same gray winter light. Ezra Caldwell stood beside Mara Whitcomb near the glass door and read the name printed in pale blue letters. Fallen Harbor Home Legacy Asset, Stewardship and Animal Care Continuity. The words were clean enough to wash blood from memory. Not that there was blood, not here. That was what made the place unsettling. There were no rusted cages, no muddy yard, no barking echoing behind walls. There were only frosted glass panels, quiet carpet, framed mission statements, and a receptionist who smiled as if sorrow had been scheduled for Tuesday between 2 and 3. Mara adjusted the strap of her leather satchel. "Let me do most of the talking." Ezra looked at her. "I do talk. I've heard rumors. I can be diplomatic. You stare at people like you're deciding where lightning should strike." Ezra considered that. "That's fair." Mara's mouth curved slightly, but her eyes stayed serious. "We are not accusing them of anything today. We are asking for records. We are seeing what language they use when they think they still control the room." Ezra looked through the glass door. Inside, beyond the reception desk, a hallway led toward several offices. On the wall hung photographs of old dogs beside older men and women. The pictures were warm. The frames were expensive. Under each photo was a brass plaque with a name, a service branch, and a date range. Some of the dogs had white muzzles. Some leaned into their handlers like tired saints. At first glance, the wall looked respectful. At second glance, Ezra noticed there were no recent photographs. Everything stopped about 6 years back. Mara pressed the door open. The receptionist led them into a conference room with a glass table and 6 identical chairs. A silver pitcher of water sat in the center, untouched. No dog bed in the corner. No leash hanging from a hook. No scuffed baseboards. Nothing alive had worn a path through this office. Calvin Rowe entered 3 minutes later. He was 50, maybe a little younger if seen from a distance, a little older if seen under honest light. His dark blonde hair was brushed neatly to the side, silver at the temples in a way that looked almost negotiated. He wore a navy suit, a white shirt, and a gray tie the color of winter sky before bad news. His smile arrived before the rest of him and settled on his face without warming it. "Ms. Whitcomb," he said, extending a hand. "Calvin Rowe, Interim Executive Director." "Mara Whitcomb." She shook his hand once. "This is Ezra Caldwell." Calvin turned to Ezra. His handshake was dry, smooth, and brief. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand you came across one of our animals under difficult circumstances." "One of our animals?" Ezra did not answer right away. He looked at Calvin's hand, then at his face. Years in places where men hid danger beneath politeness had taught Ezra not to listen only to volume. Some threats shouted, others smiled over conference tables and offered water. "His name is Frost," Ezra said. Calvin's smile remained. "Of course." Mara sat before Ezra could continue. "We're here about Frost, Cedar Hollow Trust, and the bellwether documents recovered by the sheriff's office." Calvin folded himself into the chair opposite her. He did it with a kind of practiced sorrow, as if he had spent years learning how a reasonable man should sit when explaining unpleasant necessities. "I was informed of the recovery," he said. "A confusing situation, certainly. Amos Bellwether was connected to our early program, but many of those informal arrangements predate our current governance structure. Documentation from that era is uneven." Mara opened her notebook. The teal pen appeared between her fingers. "The will names Frost individually." "So I've been told." "It also restricts sale of Cedar Hollow for 20 years, unless the care program is moved to an equivalent supervised facility." Calvin nodded slowly. "That is one interpretation." Ezra's eyes lifted. Mara spoke before he could. "What is yours?" "That Fallen Harbor home has a duty to preserve its broader mission, not simply maintain obsolete properties because of sentimental language written under outdated conditions. Cedar Hollow is remote, expensive to heat, difficult to staff, and frankly unsuitable for modern animal care standards." Mara did not react. Yet Frost was found there. "A regrettable failure in transition," Calvin said. There it was, the kind of phrase that could bury a living thing without leaving fingerprints. Ezra leaned back in his chair, one broad hand resting on his knee. He made himself breathe evenly. Frost had not been a failure in transition when Ezra lifted him from beneath the fallen fur. He had been a ribcage trembling under frozen fur. He had been one amber eye watching to see whether the next human would become another closed door. Calvin turned a tablet toward them. "You have to understand, Ms. Whitcomb, small nonprofits age, their founders pass away, volunteers leave, costs rise. We inherited a system built on good intentions, yes, but poor structure. We are trying to preserve what can be preserved." "By selling Cedar Hollow to Cascadia Alpine Development Group," Mara said. "By converting dormant assets into operational funding." "Dormant?" Calvin's smile thinned. A parcel of underused land with a deteriorating structure. And Frost? He looked briefly at Ezra, then back to Mara. Frost is an animal asset in reassignment review. The room went very still. Ezra had heard men say worse things. He had heard a whole world of cold language designed to make harm sound like weather. But this phrase carried a special kind of insult. It did not hate Frost. Hate, at least, admitted the other being existed. This phrase erased him. Mara's pen stopped moving. "Mr. Rowe," she said, "do you understand how that sounds?" "I understand how emotional people become when animals are involved." Ezra spoke quietly. "You ever sat with one while it tries not to cry out?" Calvin blinked once. "Excuse me?" "An animal asset?" Mara's foot brushed Ezra's boot under the table. Not hard, just enough. Ezra stopped. Calvin adjusted his cuff. "Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate your concern, truly, but specialized care requires resources. Resources require stewardship. Sometimes stewardship involves difficult decisions that appear cold from the outside." Mara resumed writing. "Then you won't object to providing placement records for Frost and all animals under guardian placement from the last 8 years. That may involve privacy limitations of deceased handlers and organizational confidentiality." Mara nodded as if he had offered her exactly what she expected. "Please put the refusal in writing." "I didn't refuse." "Then we'll expect the records." For the first time, Calvin's smile lost its smooth edge. Outside the conference room windows, snow slid from the roof of the building across the street. Ezra watched it fall in sheets, white and silent, covering parked cars, curbs, old footprints. Snow did not choose what to cover. Men did. By the time they left, Mara had obtained almost nothing and learned a great deal. In the stairwell, she stopped on the landing and pulled a folder from her satchel. "That was useful," she said. Ezra looked down at her. "He called Frost an asset." "Yes." "And you call that useful." "I call language evidence." Ezra looked back toward the office door above them. Mara continued. "He didn't say patient. He didn't say ward. He didn't say dog. He said asset, reassignment review, dormant property, operational funding. That tells us how the organization thinks now." "Can you prove anything with that?" "Not alone." She tapped the folder. "But it tells us where to look." They spent the afternoon in a county records room that seemed built to punish hope. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The heater clanked like an old man arguing with a pipe. Boxes of archived nonprofit filings sat on metal shelves, labeled by year and handwriting that varied from elegant to nearly criminal. Mara moved through them with the grim joy of a woman who trusted paper more than smiles. Ezra helped carry boxes. He was good at that. At first, the records from Fallen Harbor Home looked ordinary. Donation reports, veterinary reimbursements, volunteer rosters, small grants, fuel receipts, repairs, dog food invoices. The older records had names everywhere. Dogs' names, handlers' names, notes written in margins. Buster needs softer bedding. Hale refuses thunderstorms unless radio left on low. Frost sleeps near Amos. Do not separate at night. Ezra stopped at that last line. Mara noticed. What? He slid the page across. She read it once, then again. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The note was 6 years old. Frost sleeps near Amos. Do not separate at night. If Amos wakes disoriented, Frost grounds him by hand contact. Ezra imagined the old man in the photograph waking in darkness, unsure what year held him, unsure whether the storm outside was weather or memory. Then Frost, younger and strong, pressing his muzzle into a trembling hand until the room became a room again. For a moment, Ezra did not see Amos. He saw his own kitchen 2 years earlier. Claire standing beside a packed bag, her face wet but composed, saying she had been lonely beside him for years. He had wanted to reach for her. He had wanted to say something that would make the room stop collapsing. Instead, he had gone still. He had treated heartbreak like an ambush. Do not move, do not expose weakness, wait for the threat to pass. But love was not a threat. That was the joke the gods had played on him. A stupid, cruel joke. Somewhere in the heavens, a drunk little deity in charge of emotionally damaged men was probably laughing into his beard. Mara's voice brought him back. This note matters, he cleared his throat. Because Frost was trained? Because he was part of care, not inventory. As they moved forward through the years, the records changed. At first, slowly. A dog named Mabel became GP-12. A retired detection dog named Sarge became Canine Unit B4. A handler's cottage became a legacy structure. Vet notes became expense reports. Then came a new letterhead, slick and blue. Fallen Harbor Home added the phrase, Legacy Asset Stewardship. The signatures changed. The margins emptied. The dogs vanished first from the language. Then, in some cases, from the records. Transferred to partner facility, Mara read aloud. She made a note. Which facility? Ezra asked. No name listed. Another file. Placement completed. With who? No name. Another. No longer under active supervision. Ezra set both hands on the table and leaned over the page. What does that mean? Mara's face had gone very still. It means someone wrote a sentence that avoided meaning anything. She began building a list. Veterans who had passed with no close family listed. Small properties, old trucks, savings accounts, trust notes, dogs under care. Then administrative fees. Then restructuring costs, then transfers. Ezra watched the pattern emerge the way he had once watched storm maps gather color over a ridge. One flake meant nothing. 1,000 meant the road was gone. Near evening, Lillian called from the clinic. Mara put the phone on speaker. I ran a deeper behavior assessment with Frost, Lillian said. Nothing strenuous, mostly observation. Ezra straightened. How is he? Annoyed by being alive under medical supervision, which is usually a good sign. Mara smiled faintly. Lillian continued. He knows pressure interruption. When my assistant's breathing got fast after dropping a tray, Frost tried to rise and move toward her, even on the brace. I stopped him. Later, I simulated a startle response near the door. He positioned himself between me and the exit, not aggressively. Precisely. Ezra closed his eyes. Also, Lillian said, when Ezra's radio recording played from yesterday, Frost lifted his head and searched for him. Mara looked at Ezra, but he looked away. Lillian's voice softened. This dog was trained for a person who came apart quietly, not someone who threw things or shouted, someone who froze, someone who needed contact to remember where he was. The records room seemed to grow smaller. Ezra thought of Amos Bellwether, then, unwillingly, of himself. Mara ended the call with thanks and folded her hands over the notes. Frost wasn't just housed at Cedar Hollow. He was working there, helping Amos live there. Ezra said nothing. Words were gathering behind his teeth, but none of them were ready for daylight. That night, Pearl Danvers summoned Ezra to the utility station. The building squatted at the edge of town beside a fenced yard of transformers and snow-covered trucks. Inside, the operations room glowed with monitors, route maps, outage grids, and the blue-white light of weather radar. Pearl stood near the central desk in a navy sweater and orange reflective vest, her cropped steel hair sharp against the fluorescent light. On the table lay Ezra's disciplinary acknowledgment. Unsigned. Pearl tapped it with 2 fingers. You were supposed to sign this yesterday. Ezra removed his gloves. I added site observations. You added speculation. I added photographs. You left an active outage response. I did. Her eyes narrowed. That is not a defense. No? Then what are you doing? Ezra looked at the form. There it was again, the old invitation. Accept blame. Make the room quieter. Let the machine keep moving. Pearl's voice lowered. Ezra, I don't enjoy this. You know what happens when line crews improvise. Men die because somebody decides their judgment matters more than the procedure. I know what happened to your husband. The room went cold in a new way. Pearl's face did not change much, but something behind her eyes closed a door. You don't use my husband to get out of paperwork, she said. I'm not. Then don't say his name into this. Ezra nodded once. He had stepped wrong. You're right. That surprised her more than argument would have. He slid a folder across the table. But the Cedar Hollow auxiliary feed was opened manually before the storm. The cabin was marked unsafe, but evidence suggests an animal was kept there or trapped there after that. The trust documents tie that structure to animal care. If I sign that statement as written, it says the only relevant fact is that I delayed for a personal reason. And you think it wasn't personal? Ezra thought of Frost's muzzle against his hand. It became personal, he said, but it didn't start that way. Pearl stared at him for a long moment. Then she opened the folder. At first, her expression remained hard. Then her eyes paused on the panel photograph. She drew it closer. The room's monitors hummed. Somewhere a printer spat out a report no one collected. This cutout didn't fail, she said. No? She pulled up the system log on her terminal. Her fingers moved fast, practical, irritated. Work order numbers appeared. Contractor codes. Dates. A maintenance request entered 3 days before the storm. Pearl clicked once, then again. Her mouth thinned. What? Ezra asked. This request didn't come from our crew. Who filed it? A contractor account, North Pass Infrastructure. Ezra waited. Pearl opened another window. Her face shifted almost imperceptibly, but Ezra had spent his life reading men under worse light than fluorescent tubes. She had found something she did not like. North Pass has a service relationship with Cascade Alpine Development Group, she said. Silence settled between them. Pearl looked again at the unsigned form. For the first time since Ezra had known her, she did not seem eager to make the paperwork win. This doesn't clear you, she said. I didn't ask it to. It complicates the incident. Most true things do. Pearl gave him a look sharp enough to cut rope. Don't get poetic in my operations room. Yes, ma'am. She hated the ma'am. He could tell. It almost made the evening worth it. Pearl took the form and turned it face down. I'm not withdrawing the review, she said. Not yet, but I am amending the report to include a possible unauthorized service request and manual disconnection before the weather event. Ezra let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Pearl pointed at him. And if you ever leave a line site again without communicating properly, I will personally haunt your retirement. I believe you. You should. Ezra put his gloves back on. As he reached the door, Pearl spoke again. Caldwell? He turned. Her eyes had gone to the old photograph on the wall behind the operations desk, her husband in a hard hat, smiling beside a younger Pearl who looked like she had once known how to laugh without permission. Procedure matters, she said. I know. But if someone used our procedure to make a false report, she continued, voice quiet and dangerous, then they made my grid part of their lie. Ezra understood then that Pearl had not softened. She had sharpened in a new direction. He nodded. I'll send Mara your amendment. Pearl looked back at the monitor. Send her nothing until I verify it. I don't do sloppy favors. No, Ezra said. You don't. He drove to Lillian's clinic afterward. The lights were low in the recovery room. Frost lay on a thick blanket beneath the counter, not inside the kennel now, but close enough for Lillian to watch him while finishing notes. His braced paw rested forward like a formal complaint against the universe. Ezra sat on the floor beside him with Pearl's unsigned form folded in his jacket pocket. Frost opened one amber eye. "You started a paperwork war," Ezra said. The dog huffed. "Don't act innocent. You put your paw on my boot yesterday." Frost shifted, slow and careful. Then, as if to prove the point with the weary authority of a sheriff in fur, he extended his bandaged front paw and rested it lightly on Ezra's boot. Ezra stared at it. From behind the counter, Lillian said without looking up, "He's subtle." Ezra looked down at Frost. "You're a terrible influence." The shepherd's eye closed. Ezra did not move his boot. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering roofs, roads, and the clean glass office where men like Calvin Rowe turned loyalty into numbers. But under Ezra's boot, beneath the absurd weight of one bandaged paw, something held firm. A living thing had asked him not to sign away the truth, and for once Ezra had listened. The original will did not vanish with drama. No shattered office window, no dark figure slipping down a hallway, no clerk gasping over an empty drawer while thunder rolled like a judge clearing his throat. It disappeared in the ordinary way dangerous things often disappeared. A merged office, a changed filing system, a storage facility across town, a box number written on an old inventory sheet, then replaced by another number in a newer database. 3 employees who had never met Amos Bellwether, one receptionist who kept saying "Legacy Archive," as if the phrase itself could explain why a dead man's last instructions had become so difficult to find. Mara Whitcomb hated that kind of disappearance most. A stolen document at least admitted there was something worth stealing. A misplaced document could shrug forever. She called Ezra from the parking lot outside the notary office while snow gathered on her windshield in restless white strokes. "They say they can't locate it," she said. Ezra was at Dr. Lillian Voss's clinic, sitting in the recovery room with Frost asleep on a padded mat near his boots. "Can't locate it or won't?" "That is the question that keeps lawyers employed and coffee companies profitable." Frost shifted at the sound of Mara's voice through the phone, one ear lifting, the bent tip making him look sternly disappointed in the legal profession. "What happens without the original?" Ezra asked. "We still have the copy from the metal box. We have chain of custody. We have photographs. We have supporting records. But the original matters. It carries physical signs, ink age, paper, witness marks, notary seal, any attachments. If there's a fight, and there will be a fight, I want the original." Ezra looked through the clinic window. Outside, the afternoon had gone the color of wet steel. Weather reports said another storm was climbing toward the Cascades, heavier than the first, with wind strong enough to close roads by nightfall. "Who had it last?" he asked. "The old Bell and Cray notarial office. Except Bell retired, Cray passed, and the office merged with Harrow Lane Documentation Services 4 years ago." "Harrow?" "Different Harrow, probably. Don't start seeing ghosts in surnames yet." "I don't do ghosts." "No," Mara said. "You just collect unfinished business." Ezra did not answer. On the mat, Frost opened his eyes. The German shepherd's body was still too thin beneath the warm light. His yellow and black coat brushed clean now, but not yet restored to health. His braced front leg rested carefully forward. Lillian had allowed him out of the kennel for short periods because Frost rested better when he could see the room's exits and Ezra's boots. That should not have made Ezra feel responsible. It did anyway. "I may have one lead," Mara said. "June Mallory." "Who is that?" "Retired records clerk. She worked for Bell and Cray for almost 30 years. Lillian knows someone who knows someone, because apparently small mountain towns are just filing cabinets with gossip and snow tires. Useful? Very, if she remembers Amos. And if she doesn't? Then we keep digging. Ezra watched Frost's paw twitch in sleep, as if the dog was walking through an old dream, one where doors opened and the floor was warm. "Let me know," he said. Mara paused. "Ezra?" "Yeah?" "If Fallen Harbor Home realizes we're looking for the original, they may move faster." He heard what she did not say. "So we move carefully," he said. "Carefully," Mara replied, not quietly. That afternoon, Mara found June Mallory in a small blue house at the edge of Rusk Falls, where the porch railings were wrapped in faded Christmas garland that had apparently defeated all attempts at seasonal removal. June answered the door wearing a violet cardigan, cream turtleneck, wool slippers, and cat-eye glasses the color of amber tea. She was small enough to seem harmless until she looked up, and then Mara had the immediate impression of being evaluated, alphabetized, and placed in the correct drawer. "You're the lawyer," June said. "Yes, Mara Whitcomb." "You look tired." "I am." "Good. Rested lawyers are either new or expensive." June let her in. The house smelled of cinnamon, paper, and old wood. On the dining table sat 3 metal tins full of paper labels, colored tabs, rubber bands, and pencils sharpened to military precision. June moved slowly, but her hands were quick. She did not use a laptop. She used memory the way some people used a locked vault. Mara showed her a copy of Amos Bellwether's name, the date of the will, and the notary information recovered from the box. June stared at it over the rim of her glasses. "Oh," she said. "Mr. Bellwether? You remember him?" "I remember the dog first." Mara leaned forward. June smiled faintly, not with amusement, but with warmth, walking back from a long distance. "German Shepherd, black saddle, tan legs. Left ear had a bent tip, like a page corner someone folded to save their place. Very serious creature, lay under the table the entire appointment with his chin on Mr. Bellwether's boot." "Frost?" "Yes, that was it." "Frost." June tapped the paper. "Mr. Bellwether apologized because the dog shed on our rug. Mr. Cray told him any office rug that couldn't survive a little loyalty didn't deserve to be called a rug." Mara wrote that down, though it was not legally important. Some things were not evidence, but still mattered. "Do you remember the document?" Mara asked. June's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but concentration. "Blue envelope." Mara stopped writing. "You're sure?" "I am old, Ms. Whitcomb, not decorative." June reached for one of her tins and removed a pale blue label. "We used blue envelopes for testamentary instruments with attached care instructions, Mr. Cray's system. Most people hated it because it wasn't standard. I loved it because it worked." "Attached care instructions?" "For animals, dependent adults, unusual trusts, things that needed more than who gets the couch." Mr. Bellwether's had a secondary tag. "What kind?" June closed her eyes briefly. "Green half-tab, handwritten, animal ward clause, Cedar Hollow." Mara felt the room change around her. Not because June had the original, she did not, but she had given the missing thing a shape. Blue envelope, green half-tab, animal ward clause, a document with a costume, a fingerprint, a little flag in the kingdom of paper. "Do you know where it would have gone after the merger?" June's lips tightened. If they followed the conversion chart, old blue envelopes should have been archived under T-Care attachments, not standard wills. But if someone lazy handled it, they would file by decedent name only. If someone clever handled it... She let the sentence cool on the table. Mara finished it. They could bury it in a low-priority archive until a sale closed. June's eyes sharpened. "I did not say that." "No? But I did think it loudly." Mara almost smiled. June pulled a red pencil from a tin and wrote 3 possible archive codes on a note card. Her handwriting was small and stern. Start here and ask for the off-site scan ledger, not just the physical inventory. They told me the scan ledger was incomplete. Of course they did. Incomplete is the lullaby of people who don't want to get out a ladder. Mara took the card with care. Before she left, June touched the copy of Amos's name again. He was quiet, the old clerk said, but not empty. People mistake the two. He brought that dog because he said Frost helped him remember where the door was when mornings felt unfamiliar. Mara folded the note card into her notebook. Outside, the second storm had begun. By evening, snow covered Cedar Hollow so completely that the property looked less like land than a ship trapped in a white sea. Wind pressed against Ezra's cabin and moved around it with a long animal voice. The trees beyond the windows vanished and reappeared as the snow thickened, tall black shapes standing guard like ancient witnesses. Frost was not supposed to be at Ezra's cabin yet. Lillian had allowed a temporary overnight release, only because the clinic generator needed maintenance before the storm peaked, and because Ezra's cabin had heat, space, and the one thing Frost now seemed to trust more than blankets or medication: Ezra himself. Lillian had driven the dog up in her old Subaru before the road worsened, given Ezra a bag of medications, written instructions in large letters, and threatened to return from beyond the grave if he let Frost jump, climb, run, or perform any tragic nonsense. Frost now lay on a thick blanket near the wood stove, brace secure, water bowl within reach, amber eyes tracking Ezra's movements. "You heard the doctor," Ezra said, checking the stove. "No tragic nonsense." Frost's bent ear twitched. "That includes noble expressions." The dog looked more noble. "Defiant," Ezra muttered. A knock came at the door at 8:17 p.m. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor, not Pearl's blunt hammering. 3 measured knocks, polite enough to be unwelcome. Frost lifted his head. Ezra turned slowly. The wind filled the pause that followed. Snow scratched against the windows. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Another knock. Ezra crossed the room, rested one hand briefly on Frost's shoulder, then opened the door with the chain still latched. A man stood on the porch in a clean black parka, snow collecting on his shoulders but not yet softening him. He was tall and narrow-faced, with dark hair cut close and eyes that did not travel around the cabin in curiosity. They went directly to Frost. Behind him, near the drive, idled a white transport van. A second man sat inside, wearing a knit cap and looking profoundly unhappy with the weather. "Mr. Caldwell?" the man at the door asked. "Yes." "Neil Harrow, Fallen Harbor Home." He lifted a waterproof clipboard. "I'm here regarding the animal currently in your possession." Ezra did not move. "His name is Frost." Neil smiled with professional patience. "Of course. Frost, we have documentation authorizing transfer to a licensed recovery facility under organizational oversight." "Tonight?" "Given the circumstances, yes." "There's a storm. The facility is prepared to receive him." Ezra looked past him at the van. Its side door window was fogged, the rear compartment dark. No visible heated medical crate. No ramp suitable for an injured shepherd. No veterinary markings beyond a magnetic sign that read, "Animal Transport Services," in letters already peeling at the corner. "Where's the crate?" Ezra asked. "In the rear." "Climate controlled?" The pause was small. "Standard transport conditions." "Veterinary attendant?" "The driver is certified for animal handling." The man in the van sneezed. Frost began to rise. Ezra heard the shift of blanket and turned. Down. Frost ignored him halfway, which was apparently the compromise of kings. He pushed himself up on 3 good limbs and the braced fourth, trembling with the effort, ears forward, body angled not toward the door but between Ezra and Neil. He did not growl. That made it worse. A growl could be dismissed as instinct. This was placement, deliberate, trained. An old duty struggling upright on an injured leg. Ezra stepped back from the door and put his hand on Frost's shoulder. The muscles beneath the fur quivered. "I said down," he murmured. Frost held for 2 more seconds. Then, with visible reluctance, he lowered himself to the blanket. His amber eyes stayed on Neil Harrow. Neil looked at the dog as one might look at a difficult chair that needed moving. "You see why this should be handled by professionals," he said. Ezra's voice went flat. "I do." The driver came up the steps then, carrying a folded leash and a thin file. He was younger, round-faced, red-nosed from cold, and nervous in the way people became when they had been told a job was routine and then met a room that disagreed. "Mr. Harrow," he said, glancing at the paper, "do we have the intake for a freezer?" The silence was absolute. Ezra looked at him. The driver swallowed. "Frost. Sorry, Frost." It was a tiny mistake, a sound wrong by 1 syllable. In another world, Ezra might have let it pass, but not this world. Not after the photograph of Amos's hand on Frost's neck. Not after the will named him. Not after old records said do not separate at night. Not after a blue envelope with a green tab waited somewhere in a dark archive while clean-handed men spoke of assets. "These people," Ezra said quietly, "don't know his name." Neil's expression tightened. "That is not relevant to our authority." "It is to mine." "You have no authority, Mr. Caldwell. You are not the owner." "No," Ezra said. "I'm the person who found him under your organization's care arrangement after someone cut heat to the place he was tied to." Neil raised the clipboard slightly. "This can be resolved without hostility." "There isn't any hostility." Neil looked at Ezra's face and seemed unconvinced. Ezra took out his phone and called Mara. She answered over wind noise. "Please tell me this is not the part where you did something dramatic." "Neil Harrow from Fallen Harbor is at my cabin with a transport van. Says he's taking Frost." Mara's voice changed. "Do not let them remove him. Put me on speaker." Ezra did. Neil listened while Mara identified herself, then explained that Frost was under active veterinary care, tied to a disputed trust, and subject to pending legal questions concerning welfare and placement authority. Neil's tone remained smooth. "Ms. Whitcomb, Fallen Harbor Home retains administrative control over animals in its program. You also have a duty not to move an injured animal without appropriate medical clearance. We have arranged a licensed facility. Send me the facility name, veterinarian contact, transport specifications, and written authorization." "I have documents here." "Email them." "I'm standing in a storm." "That was your scheduling choice." Ezra almost smiled. Then another set of headlights turned into the drive. Pearl Danvers stepped from her utility truck in an orange storm parka, hood pulled tight, reflective strips flashing in the van's lights. She came up the porch like a woman arriving to argue with God about code violations and fully expecting to win. "I got a grid alert from this spur," she said, then looked at Neil. "Who are you?" Neil introduced himself. Pearl's gaze moved to the clipboard, the van, the driver, then Frost inside the cabin. "Animal transport?" she asked. "Yes," Neil said. "Authorized recovery." "In this weather?" "The matter is time-sensitive." Pearl's eyes narrowed. "Most bad decisions say that when they're trying to outrun review." Neil's politeness chilled. "This is an organizational matter." Pearl stepped closer. "I am the operations manager responsible for this access road, and your van is parked half in my utility clearance, so congratulations. It is now also a utility matter." Through the phone, Mara said, "Pearl." Pearl glanced at Ezra's phone. "Whitcomb?" "Yes, I'm filing for temporary hold right now. Dr. Voss is sending medical status. Deputy Rowan is being contacted." Neil's jaw worked once. You cannot simply prevent lawful transfer because emotions are high. Frost shifted again, but this time he did not try to stand. He placed his chin on his braced paw and watched. Ezra noticed that. The dog had done what he could. Now he was waiting to see if the humans would be worth all their paperwork. Minutes passed in fragments. Mara typing, Lillian calling in on another line, voice sharp enough to cut gauze, stating Frost was not cleared for transport without controlled conditions. Deputy Rowan confirming he was en route as far as roads allowed. Pearl ordering the driver to move the van out of the utility clearance and then inspecting the tires with open disapproval. Neil Harrow remained on the porch, clean parka gathering snow, clipboard held against his chest like a shield painted white. Finally, Mara's voice came through the speaker. Temporary veterinary hold request filed with the emergency clerk. Deputy Hale has the case reference. Until this is reviewed, removal would create a documented welfare dispute. Neil looked at Ezra, then at Pearl, then at the dog. For the first time, his calm seemed less like control and more like a coat buttoned too tight. This is unnecessary, he said. No, Pearl replied. Unnecessary is driving an under-equipped van into a mountain storm to move an injured dog whose name your driver couldn't read. The driver stared at the porch boards. Neil folded his papers carefully. We will revisit this through proper channels. Do, Mara said through the phone. I enjoy channels. Neil turned toward the van. As he stepped off the porch, the driver hurried after him, clutching the leash he had never used. They reached the vehicle, and for a moment the wind shifted, carrying Neil's voice back toward the cabin. If this isn't finished before the end of the month, he said, low and irritated, the land contract becomes a nightmare. The words struck the porch harder than the snow. Ezra looked at Pearl. Pearl looked at Mara's glowing name on the phone. Inside, Frost raised his head. No one spoke until the van pulled away, red taillights fading into the storm like two small wounds closing under white cloth. Ezra shut the door. The cabin seemed warmer after the latch clicked, though the fire had not changed. Frost's body relaxed by inches. Ezra crossed the room and knelt beside him, checking the brace with careful hands. The shepherd watched him, breathing slow. You stood up, Ezra said. Doctor told you not to. Frost blinked. Don't look proud. Frost looked extremely proud. Pearl remained near the door, snow melting from her boots onto Ezra's floor. She stared at the dog for a long moment, then at the unsigned disciplinary form, still lying on Ezra's table, where he had been reviewing it earlier. They called him property, she said. Ezra nodded. Pearl's mouth hardened. I have spent half my life writing rules because without rules, people get hurt. I will not watch someone turn rules into a cage and call it care. Mara, still on the speaker, exhaled. That sentence may become useful. Pearl looked at the phone. Don't quote me until I've had coffee. Ezra finally let himself sit on the floor beside Frost. The storm pressed against the cabin, but it no longer sounded like a god trying to enter. It sounded like something held outside, for now, by timber, fire, and 4 people who had chosen not to look away. Frost moved his muzzle onto Ezra's wrist. This time, Ezra did not freeze. He rested his other hand lightly over the dog's shoulder, feeling the breath beneath the fur, the fragile rhythm of a life that paperwork had nearly carried back into the dark. On the porch, snow covered Neil Harrow's footprints within minutes, but his words remained. End of the month. Land contract, nightmare. Ezra looked toward the window, where the white world hid Cedar Hollow from sight. Somewhere under that snow, a dead man's promise had begun to rise. The road beyond Larkspur Pass looked like it had been carved through the back of a white giant. Snow rose high on both sides, packed by plows into walls taller than Ezra Caldwell's truck. The sky had cleared only halfway after the second storm, leaving behind a pale, hard light that made every ridge seem older than memory. Wind moved loose powder across the asphalt in thin, ghostly ribbons. Ezra drove with both hands on the wheel. Myra Whitcomb sat in the passenger seat with a folder on her lap, her burgundy scarf tucked beneath her chin, and her teal pen clipped to the outside pocket of her coat. She had slept little. That showed in the faint shadows beneath her eyes, but not in her voice. Mara had the kind of exhaustion that sharpened rather than softened her. "Gideon Price may not talk," she said. Ezra kept his eyes on the road. "Then why are we going?" "Because he already talked once." "When?" "When he left Fallen Harbor home. Not loudly, not in a way anyone could use. But he filed one internal objection before they dismissed him. It mentioned Cedar Hollow by name. And then he disappeared. He moved across the pass, took part-time work repairing furniture, and stopped answering calls from anyone connected to the organization." "That doesn't sound like a witness." "No," Mara said. "It sounds like a man who still has a conscience and hates it." Ezra understood that more than he wanted to. The town beyond the pass was called Belrun, a narrow place tucked beside a frozen river, with one grocery store, one diner, one mechanic, and a church whose steeple leaned slightly as though even faith got tired in winter. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft gray lines. Snow covered the rooftops so heavily that every building looked like it was wearing an old white hat. Gideon Price lived at the far edge of town, in a rented duplex beside a stand of bare cottonwoods. His porch had not been fully shoveled. A narrow path led from the street to the door, just wide enough for one man who did not expect visitors. Mara knocked. No answer. She knocked again, softer this time. A curtain shifted. Ezra saw part of a face appear and vanish. Mara stepped back so the man inside could see her clearly. "Mr. Price, my name is Mara Whitcomb. We spoke by phone. This is Ezra Caldwell. We're here about Amos Bellwether and Frost." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the door opened with the chain still latched. Gideon Price looked out through the gap. He was tall and thin, 61, but worn older by the kind of worry that chews from the inside. His gray hair hung past his ears, uncombed but clean. A short, uneven beard shadowed his jaw. He wore a brown sweater with one repaired elbow and held a white coffee mug in both hands, as if warmth was something that might escape if not gripped tightly. His eyes moved first to Mara, then Ezra, then to the road behind them. "You weren't followed?" he asked. Ezra looked down the empty street. "No." "You wouldn't know." "I would." Gideon studied him for a second. Something in Ezra's stillness seemed to satisfy or unsettle him. Maybe both. The chain slid free. Inside, Gideon's house smelled of coffee, wood dust, and old paper. Half-repaired chairs leaned against one wall. A small workbench stood beneath the window, crowded with clamps, sandpaper, jars of screws, and a lamp with a green shade. There were no photographs on the walls, only pale rectangles where frames had once hung. Gideon motioned them to the kitchen table. "I don't have much," he said. Mara sat. "You may have enough." That's what people say when they need you to risk what little peace you have left. Ezra remained standing near the doorway, not crowding the room. He knew the posture of a cornered man. Gideon did not need another person leaning over him. Mara placed a copy of Amos Bellwether's photograph on the table. Gideon looked at it. The change was small, but Ezra caught it. The man's fingers tightened around the mug. His throat moved once. He did not touch the photograph. "Frost," Gideon said. "You knew him?" Mara asked. "I transported him twice. Once for dental work. Once after Amos fell on the back steps." Gideon gave a brittle little laugh. "Dog hated my van. Not because he was scared, because he thought Amos shouldn't be out of sight. Sat there glaring at me like I'd personally insulted the laws of the universe. Ezra looked at the photograph. He could imagine that glare. "What happened at Cedar Hollow?" Mara asked. Gideon set the mug down. Coffee trembled inside it. "At first, nothing bad. That's what makes the rest worse." He rubbed both hands over his face. "People want villains to arrive wearing black coats and carrying torches. Most of the time, they arrive with budgets." Mara did not interrupt. Gideon looked past them toward the window, where snow clung to the sill. Fallen Harbor used to be small. Poor but decent. Amos, Ruth Carver, Old Dale Finney, a few others, veterans mostly, some widows. They had more stubbornness than money. The dogs had names. The handlers had names. If a veteran passed and no family could take the animal, Fallen Harbor stepped in. Sometimes forever. Sometimes until placement. Sometimes it was just keeping one old dog warm through one last winter. His voice thinned on the last sentence. "I drove dogs to vet appointments, delivered feed, wrote updates to people who would never read them because they were already buried. It sounds foolish, I know." "No?" Ezra said. Gideon looked at him, surprised by the quickness of the answer. Ezra did not explain. Mara gently pushed the photograph closer. What changed? Leadership, language. That was the first sign. Gideon shook his head. No one came in saying, "Let's betray the dead." They said, "Let's modernize." They said, "Let's protect the mission." They said, "Let's identify dormant value." And maybe at the start, some of them believed it. Calvin Rowe? He was brought in as a consultant first, polished, smart, very good at making cruel math sound compassionate. Gideon's mouth twisted. He didn't say dogs were expensive. He said legacy animal commitments created sustainability pressure. Mara wrote that down. Ezra moved closer to the table. "What about Cedar Hollow?" Gideon's eyes lowered. "There was a meeting," he said. "I still remember the projector humming. Stupid thing kept flickering. Calvin had a slide deck showing land values. Cedar Hollow was the prize. Remote, scenic, near-planned winter recreation access. He called it a dormant parcel." "Did anyone mention Amos's restrictions?" Mara asked. "I did." The room became very quiet. Gideon stood and went to a narrow cabinet beside the stove. He pulled out a brown craft envelope tied with red string. The edges were soft from handling. He laid it on the table but kept one hand on it, as if parting with it required a final argument with himself. "I told them Amos's will had an animal care clause. I told them Frost was named. I told them the place wasn't just land." His voice grew smaller. "They said the original document was not currently available for review, and until located, operations would proceed under the current board's interpretation of organizational authority." Mara's pen stopped. Gideon gave a humorless smile. You hear enough phrases like that, and one day you wake up living in a coffin made of office language. Ezra looked at the envelope. "Why didn't you go public?" he asked. It came out too blunt. Mara glanced at him, but Gideon only nodded, as if he had been waiting for the blade and preferred it clean. "Because I was scared," Gideon said. No performance, no excuse polished smooth by practice. "I was 60. My wife had passed. My insurance was through the job. They said I had taken documents improperly. They said if I made accusations, they would pursue damages. They said no one would believe a disgruntled employee angry over restructuring." He swallowed. "So I told myself someone else would stop it." His fingers tightened on the envelope. No one did. The shame in the room had weight. It sat among them like a fourth guest, old and familiar, wearing no coat despite the cold. Ezra thought of all the times he had chosen silence because silence looked like discipline from the outside. How clean it seemed, how noble even. But silence, left too long, became a locked room. someone always ended up on the other side of the door. Gideon untied the red string. Inside were printed emails, copied spreadsheets, scanned pages, and a folded letter in a plastic sleeve. Mara took them one at a time, careful but fast, her eyes sharpening. "Internal emails," she said, "placement lists, fee schedules, administrative cost increases, transfer notes." "Some of the dogs were moved to decent facilities," Gideon said quickly. "I won't lie and say everything was bad. That's how they got away with it. Enough was proper to make the rest look like paperwork." Mara nodded. "That matters. There's a clearer scan of Amos's will in there. Not the original, but better than the box copy. And that letter." Gideon tapped the plastic sleeve. "I found it in a Cedar Hollow file. I don't think he ever mailed it." Mara slid the letter toward Ezra. He hesitated. "This is for you to read," she said. "Why?" "Because I think you need to understand who Frost was before he became evidence." Ezra took the letter. The handwriting was uneven but careful. Amos Bellwether had written like a man walking across ice, slowly, knowing each step might fail him. "To whoever takes responsibility after I am gone, Frost is not young anymore, though he pretends otherwise when the first snow comes. He sleeps by the door unless I tell him twice that the house is safe. Some nights he wakes me before I know I am lost. He puts his head under my hand, and I remember the bed, the stove, the year, my own name. There were years when I thought I had come home because my boots were in an American hallway. Frost knew better. He brought me back in smaller ways, morning by morning, breath by breath. If one day I do not know how to call him, I ask that someone still call him with love." Ezra stopped reading. The kitchen blurred for half a second. He did not cry. The body had old defenses. His jaw tightened until it ached. The muscles in his throat worked like a gate frozen shut. Mara looked away, giving him the small mercy of privacy in a room with no private corners. Outside, wind brushed snow from the roof in a soft hiss. Ezra thought of Claire. Not the betrayal first, not the man she left with, not the ring beside the sink. He thought of evenings when she had stood in the doorway of his workshop, asking nothing complicated, just whether he would come inside. Whether he was all right, whether he could look at her when she spoke. He had been in the same house, sometimes the same room, and still farther away than the other side of an ocean. For 2 years he had told himself betrayal was the deepest cut. Now, holding Amos Bellwether's letter, he understood another kind of wound, to be beside someone and still not be reached, to lose a name inside the silence of another person, to be abandoned not by footsteps leaving, but by words never arriving. He folded the letter carefully. Gideon watched him. "I should have done more." Ezra looked at the older man. "There were easy things to say. It wasn't your fault. You were afraid. You're helping now." Easy things often sounded like lies wearing church clothes. So Ezra said, "Do more now." Gideon's face changed. Not relief, not forgiveness. A task. That some men could accept when they could not accept grace. "I'll sign a statement," Gideon said, "and I'll testify if it comes to that." Mara let out a breath. "I'll draft it today. You'll need to say I took copies." "Yes?" "They'll use that against me." "Yes." "Good." Gideon nodded once, almost to himself. "Then at least I'll be standing where they can see me." They left Belrin with the envelope inside Mara's satchel and Amos's letter copied twice, logged and sealed. The pass was worsening again by the time they reached the truck. Snow hit the windshield in quick white bursts, tapping like impatient fingers. Mara did not speak for several miles. Then she said, "You handled him well." Ezra watched the road. "I asked him why he stayed quiet." "You asked what the story needed." "I asked what I wanted to ask myself." Mara turned to him but said nothing. Ezra did not look away from the road. Claire used to say I could disappear while standing right in front of her. The truck moved between walls of snow. She was right, he added. Mara's voice was careful. People can be right and still hurt you. I know. That does not make the hurt smaller. No? For a while, only the wipers spoke. Back in Rusk Falls, Pearl Danvers was still in the operations room, though her shift should have ended hours earlier. The screens threw blue light across her face. A mug of coffee sat untouched beside her Blackroot notebook. Ezra and Mara entered through the side door after calling ahead. Pearl did not greet them. She pointed at a printed log sheet. I verified the Cedar Hollow auxiliary heat feed. Her voice was flat, but beneath it lay a controlled fury Ezra recognized. The request came through North Pass Infrastructure contractor account. Work order marked the secondary cabin as unused and non-critical. Mara stepped closer. Was it non-critical? Not according to our archived service designation. Pearl tapped another page. 5 years ago, that structure was listed for minimum heat maintenance during winter because of long-term animal care use. The designation was never properly removed. The contractor request overrode it without attaching the required site confirmation. Can you certify that? Mara asked. Pearl gave her a look. I don't say things in rooms I won't put on paper. A rare and terrible compliment, in Pearl's language. She handed Mara a signed technical statement. I am not doing this because I've joined your little crusade, Pearl said. I don't have a crusade, Mara replied. You absolutely have a crusade. You carry it in that satchel, like lunch. Pearl turned to Ezra. And you. Don't look satisfied. You still created an operational complication. Yes, but someone used my grid to make a lie look routine. Pearl's jaw set. A false report in winter can harm slower than a snapped line, but don't confuse slow with harmless. Mara placed Pearl's statement in the folder beside Gideon's envelope. The case, which had been a shape beneath snow, now had bones. The last piece came from a man named Howard Pike. Mara called him from Ezra's truck outside the clinic because Howard refused video calls on principle and owned a phone old enough to qualify as historic architecture. He was 72, a retired estate attorney with a voice like gravel warmed by bourbon, though Mara assured Ezra he mostly drank terrible decaf and complained about it as if someone else kept buying it. Howard listened while Mara summarized the will, the trust, the transfer, the original document issue, Gideon's files, Pearl's technical statement, Lillian's medical report, and June Mallory's archive notes. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Howard said, Stop trying to prove your lineman inherited anything. Ezra looked at Mara. Mara rolled her eyes, but put him on speaker. Howard continued, That is their trap. They'll frame him as an outsider interfering with property. Don't chase ownership. Chase duty. Mara leaned against the truck door. Breach of fiduciary obligation. Now you sound less like a tired raccoon in a law library. Thank you, Howard. Don't thank me. File for temporary restraint on the sale. Argue preservation of trust purpose, disputed authority, welfare risk to a named living ward, and potential spoliation if records keep wandering into magical archive fog. Ezra mouthed, Magical archive fog. Mara shook her head at him. Howard was not finished. Attach the dog's medical status. Attach the utility statement. Attach the old designation for heat maintenance. Attach the better scan. Attach the retired clerk's note about filing classification. And for heaven's sake, make the judge understand this isn't about a man wanting land. It's about a trustee trying to sell the roof off a promise. The words stayed in the cold cab after the call ended. The roof off a promise. By midnight, Mara's office lights were still on. Ezra sat at a spare desk, not because he could draft motions, but because Mara had given him a stack of scanned pages to sort by date, and he could do that without making the law worse. Lillian emailed the updated veterinary report. Frost was stable, but not cleared for transport, except under controlled conditions. June sent a handwritten note confirming her memory of the blue envelope with green half-tab and the relevant archive paths. Gideon signed his statement electronically after Mara read every paragraph to him twice. Pearl's technical certification arrived at 12:41 a.m., followed by a second email correcting a poll number because Pearl Danvers would apparently rather fight a bear than submit an imprecise document. At 2:18 a.m., Mara filed the emergency motion seeking a temporary halt to the Cedar Hollow sale. No music swelled, no one cheered. The filing confirmation appeared on the screen, plain and blue. Mara leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. There. Ezra stood beside the window. Snow fell beneath the streetlight outside, each flake briefly visible, then gone. He had seen firefights end with less silence than that small digital confirmation. "Will it work?" he asked. Mara opened her eyes. "It gives the truth a place to stand." That was all. It was enough for the hour. Ezra reached his cabin close to dawn. The eastern sky had not yet brightened. The stove had settled into a low orange glow. Frost lay on the rug near it, his head resting on Ezra's boot the moment Ezra sat down, as if the dog had been waiting to anchor him back to the room. Ezra was too tired to keep all the old doors closed inside himself. He bent forward and ran his hand, awkward but gentle, along Frost's back. The shepherd's fur was warmer now, clean under his palm, the sharpness of bone not gone, but less shocking than before. "I'm not good at keeping anyone," Ezra said quietly. Frost did not move. The room held its breath. Ezra swallowed. "But I'll learn not to leave." The words were not grand. They did not mend the past or guarantee the future. They were not a vow carved into stone by some mountain god. They were smaller than that, human-sized, dog-herd. And in the quiet before morning, that made them sacred enough. The hearing took place in a county courtroom so small that Winter seemed to have come inside and sat down with everyone else. Snow clung to coat hems. Boots left dark half-moons on the worn floor. The old heater beneath the window clanked and sighed, doing its best impression of a tired dragon chained under the courthouse. No crowd filled the benches. No reporters waited with bright cameras. No judge's gavel cracked like thunder. There were only folders, wet wool, low voices, and the kind of silence that asked whether a promise still mattered when no one became rich by keeping it. Ezra Caldwell sat behind Mara Whitcomb, hands folded between his knees, shoulders broad beneath his olive field jacket. He had worn a clean denim shirt because Mara had told him the court appreciated visible effort, and because Pearl Danvers had looked at his usual work pants and said, "Try not to dress like you were summoned by a snowplow." Frost was not in the courtroom. Dr. Lillian Voss had been firm about that. The German shepherd was resting at the clinic where his brace could be checked, his medication managed, and his stubborn desire to supervise civilization gently discouraged. Still, Ezra felt him there in the empty space beside his boot. Calvin Rowe sat at the other table with his attorney and two neat folders stacked in front of him. He wore a charcoal suit and a tie the color of cold water. He looked composed, reasonable, almost saddened by the inconvenience of conflict. Ezra had seen that look on men who wanted mercy for themselves and efficiency for everyone else. The judge, Ellen Markham, was in her 60s, narrow-faced, silver-haired, and unimpressed by theatrical breathing. She read through the first filing with one hand resting against her temple, then looked over her glasses. "This is an emergency motion to temporarily halt transfer or sale of the Cedar Hollow parcel," she said, "pending review of trust obligations, animal welfare concerns, and disputed authority over a named living ward. Correct?" Mara stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Calvin's attorney stood as well. "Your Honor, Fallen Harbor Home is a financially strained nonprofit attempting to preserve its mission under difficult circumstances. The petitioner is asking this court to freeze a lawful transaction based on incomplete documents, emotional allegations, and the actions of a utility employee with no ownership interest." Utility employee. Ezra felt the phrase land without flinching. There had been a time when such words would have pushed him into old armor. Former SEAL, combat record, years of service, a man's invisible medals rising to defend him. But this was not about proving who he had been. It was about Frost. It was about Amos Bellwether. It was about a cabin under snow where the heat had been cut and a living promise had been left to become weather. Mara did not object to the phrase. She only glanced at Ezra once, then faced the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "we are not asking the court to award property to Mr. Caldwell. We are not asking for final judgment today. We are asking the court to preserve the status quo long enough to determine whether Fallen Harbor Home violated the very trust purpose it was created to protect." That was Howard Pike's line, sharpened by Mara's voice. Across the aisle, Howard himself sat in the second row, retired but not harmless, wearing a tweed jacket and holding his silver pocket watch in one hand. He had refused to sit at counsel table, saying he was too old to be useful under fluorescent lights, then proceeded to pass Mara 3 handwritten notes before the hearing began. The first witness was Calvin Rowe. He spoke smoothly. He explained rising costs, remote maintenance, staffing shortages, insurance risk, modern animal care standards, and the burden of legacy properties. He did not sound cruel. That was the worst of it. Some of what he said even made sense. Cedar Hollow was difficult to heat. The secondary cabin needed repair. The old model of volunteer-based care had become unstable. A small organization could not survive on sentiment alone. Ezra listened, jaw steady, as Calvin described the sale to Cascade Alpine Development Group as an effort to convert dormant value into operational resources. Dormant value. Ezra wondered if that was what they had called the heat in the cabin too, before shutting it down. Mara rose for questioning. "Mr. Rowe, did Fallen Harbor Home possess records indicating that Amos Bellwether's will restricted sale of Cedar Hollow?" "Our records from that period were incomplete." "That was not my question." Calvin's smile thinned. "We had references to older intentions." Whether those intentions were legally controlling remained unclear. Mara placed an email on the document camera. The screen showed a message from a board meeting packet Gideon had provided. "Cedar Hollow clause may complicate sale timeline. Recommend proceeding under current governance authority unless original instrument is produced." Mara let the words sit in the room. "You had knowledge of a clause that might restrict sale," she said. "We had knowledge of a possible issue." "And you proceeded?" "Pending verification, yes." "Did you search for the original will?" "We requested archive review." "Did you request the blue envelope file category used for testamentary documents with animal care attachments?" Calvin paused. It was a small pause, less than 2 seconds, but in that pause the clean table tilted. "I am not familiar with that classification," he said. Mara nodded once. "June Mallory is." June Mallory took the stand with a careful dignity that made her look both grandmotherly and mildly dangerous. She wore a blue-green coat, cat-eye glasses, and a floral scarf pinned with an old brooch. She had brought her own pencil. Ezra suspected no one alive could stop her from doing so. June explained the old Bell and Cray filing system, blue envelopes for wills with special care instructions, green half-tabs for animal ward clauses, archive paths that would not appear under a basic name search. She did not accuse anyone of taking the will. She did not need to. She described the system so clearly that the failure to search it properly began to look less like confusion and more like convenience wearing snow boots. When Calvin's attorney asked whether her memory could be mistaken, June looked at him over her glasses. "Young man," she said, though he was at least 40, "I forgot where I parked my car last Tuesday. I did not forget a German shepherd lying under Mr. Bellwether's chair with one ear folded like a bookmark. Some details are ordinary. Some details put their paws on your memory and stay there." Even Judge Markham looked down for a moment, perhaps to hide a smile. Then Gideon Price testified. He held the rail with one hand. His voice trembled at first, but it did not run away from him. He described Fallen Harbor home as it had been, poor, sincere, full of old dogs and older promises. He spoke of food deliveries, handwritten updates, emergency vet calls, and Amos Bellwether insisting that Frost hated being called the dog, when everyone knew perfectly well he had a name. Then Gideon described the change, the new management, the language, asset optimization, administrative restructuring, legacy animal commitments. He admitted he had stayed quiet too long. He admitted he feared being sued, losing insurance, losing the last structure his life had. He did not present himself as brave, and perhaps because of that, the room believed him more. Mara asked, "Why are you speaking now?" Gideon looked down at his hands. "Because I saw a photograph of Frost after he was found," he said. "And I realized I had been telling myself the harm was abstract. It wasn't. It had eyes." Ezra looked away. Not because the words were weak, because they were too strong. Pearl Danvers testified next. She walked to the stand like a woman approaching a faulty breaker box she intended to shame into obedience. Her orange safety vest looked strange in court, but she had worn it deliberately. Pearl did not dress for symbolism which somehow made it symbolic. She explained the Cedar Hollow auxiliary heat feed, the archive designation requiring minimum heat maintenance for long-term animal care use, and the contractor request that marked the cabin as unused and non-critical. "Was that designation accurate?" Mara asked. "No." "Was the override properly supported?" "No." "Could cutting that heat source before a winter storm place an animal inside or near that structure at risk?" Pearl's mouth tightened. "Yes?" Calvin's attorney tried to suggest the utility issue was merely clerical. Pearl turned her pale eyes on him. "A clerical error in July makes a mess," she said. "A clerical error in a mountain winter can become a body no one expected to find. Do not ask me to call it small because it was typed neatly." The courtroom became very still. Dr. Lillian Voss testified last. She did not dramatize Frost's condition. She did not need to. She described his dehydration, chill exposure, weight loss, injured front leg, and the risk of transport without medical controls. She explained his trained behaviors: door monitoring, grounding contact, pressure interruption, placement between a distressed person and an exit. "Based on your assessment," Mara asked, "was Frost merely housed at Cedar Hollow?" Lillian's eyes moved briefly toward Ezra, then back to the judge. "No," she said. "He was placed there as part of a care relationship. He supported Amos Bellwether, and after Amos passed, the trust documents indicate Frost himself was supposed to receive care. That is not sentimental language. It is a care obligation." Calvin's attorney stood again for final argument. He spoke of burden, cost, operational reality. He warned against allowing emotion to govern nonprofit management. He said one dog, however sympathetic, could not outweigh the survival of an organization. Mara stood slowly. For the first time that day, she did not look at her notes. "Your Honor, this case is not about whether organizations have expenses. They do. It is not about whether old programs sometimes need restructuring. They do. It is not about whether Cedar Hollow is difficult to maintain. It is." She turned slightly, her voice steady. This case is about whether a trustee may accept property for a purpose, ignore that purpose when land becomes valuable, fail to meaningfully search records that may restrict a sale, permit a named living ward to be left in dangerous conditions, and then call the result stewardship. No one moved. The court does not need to decide every issue today, Mara continued. But if the sale proceeds now, the trust purpose may be permanently defeated before the truth is fully heard. We ask only that the promise be preserved long enough for the court to determine whether it was betrayed. Judge Markham took 27 minutes. Ezra counted without meaning to. When she returned, the old heater clanked twice, like a cranky herald announcing judgment for a kingdom of wet boots and paper cups. The judge did not declare Calvin a villain. She did not declare Fallen Harbor home corrupt. She did not hand Cedar Hollow to Ezra as if life were a fairy tale where wounded men became rich by finding wounded dogs. She issued a temporary injunction halting the sale of Cedar Hollow. She ordered an independent review of Fallen Harbor Home's trust administration and animal care records related to deceased veterans without direct family representation. She required preservation of all documents tied to Amos Bellwether, Cedar Hollow, and guardian placement records. She granted temporary guardianship and care authority for Frost to Ezra Caldwell under veterinary supervision by Dr. Lillian Voss, pending further review. Temporary, not victory carved in marble, but enough. Ezra lowered his head. For a moment he did not know what he felt. Relief? Yes. Anger? Still. Exhaustion, fear of responsibility arriving in official language. Then Mara touched his shoulder once. "He's staying," she said quietly. Ezra nodded. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun again, gentle now. Calvin Rowe left without looking at Ezra. Neil Harrow, who had sat behind him the whole time with a white clipboard on his knees, avoided everyone's eyes. Gideon stood near the steps, shaking so badly that June Mallory took his elbow and told him if he fainted she would file him under unnecessary drama. Gideon laughed once, unexpectedly. It sounded painful. It sounded alive. Weeks did not heal Cedar Hollow. They revealed it. Ezra began working there on his days off, sometimes alone, sometimes with help from people who pretended they were only stopping by. He replaced cracked window glass. He repaired the back steps. He reconnected the minimum heat line with Pearl watching over the panel like a stern mountain oracle. He reinforced the porch rail. He cleared the room where the old army blanket had been found and laid new flooring over the damaged boards, leaving the repaired section visible instead of hiding it. Some scars, he had decided, should not be erased. Only made safe to stand on, Mara continued the legal work to restructure Cedar Hollow under transparent oversight. Howard Pike helped rebuild the trust language, grumbling about modern nonprofit bylaws as if they had personally insulted his ancestors. Gideon sorted old files into names again: Amos and Frost, Ruth and Mabel, Dale and Sarge, Elaine and Bishop. June mailed a tin box of blue labels and green half-tabs with a note that read, "For easier finding. Computers are useful, but occasionally as dumb as a goat in a lawyer hat." Ezra showed the note to Frost. Frost seemed to agree with June's assessment of technology. Pearl visited one afternoon to inspect the new electrical work. She walked through the secondary cabin with a clipboard, checked the panel, tested the outlets, frowned at a junction box Ezra had already fixed, and finally declared, "Acceptable." From Pearl, this was practically a coronation. On her way out, she left a large bag of senior working dog food on the porch. Ezra looked at it, then at her. Pearl zipped her coat. It was on sale. It's prescription grade. Very aggressive sale. He did not smile until she turned away. He understood then that some people apologized with words, some with touch, and some by ensuring the wiring would not burn down around you. The world needed all kinds. Frost healed slowly, as Lillian had promised and warned. His limp did not vanish completely. On cold mornings, his front left leg stayed stiff for a few steps, and he gave Ezra a look suggesting the weather had been poorly managed. But his coat regained shine, his ribs no longer showed sharply beneath the fur. The old brass tag reading Frost hung from his repaired leather collar, and Ezra added a small yellow reflector beside it for winter walks. Frost tolerated this modern addition with the dignity of a retired king forced to wear a safety vest. Ezra kept Amos's photograph on the wall near the stove, not hidden in a drawer, not turned into a shrine. Just there, a hand on a dog's neck, a promise made before everything became difficult. On the first night the heat held steady through the entire Cedar Hollow cabin, Ezra stayed there instead of driving back to his own place. Snow fell beyond the windows, thick and soundless. The repaired panes reflected the stove glow. The room smelled of pine boards, fresh sealant, old wool, and dog breath. Frost lay near Ezra's boots, head up, eyes calm. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a lantern. Small, yes, fragile against the vast white dark, but lit. Ezra took out his phone. He stared at Claire Caldwell's number longer than he cared to admit. He had not called her in months. There was no reason that would sound sensible in court or on a utility report. He did not want her back. He did not want to accuse her. He did not want to reopen the ruins and stand inside them, pointing at who broke which beam first. But Amos's letter had stayed with him. If one day I do not know how to call him, I ask that someone still call him with love. Ezra had spent years not calling anyone with love, not Claire, not himself, not the pieces of his life he had declared unsalvageable because grief made poor architecture. He pressed call. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Claire's recorded voice was older than his memory of it, or perhaps he was only hearing honestly now. Ezra waited for the beep. Then he spoke. "Claire, it's Ezra." Frost lifted his head slightly. Ezra looked at the stove. "I'm not calling to hurt you, and I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted to say—" He stopped. The room did not punish him for stopping. Snow tapped the glass softly, patient as an old teacher. "I understand I was silent too long," he said. "I thought being steady was enough. I thought if I kept things fixed, paid for, protected, then the rest would speak for itself. It didn't." His throat tightened, but this time he did not retreat. "I'm learning to say what needs saying. Late, maybe, but I'm learning." He ended the call before he could turn it into a plea. For several seconds, nothing happened. No miracle, no music, no ancient curse breaking above the Cascade ridges. Only a man in a repaired cabin, breathing through the ache of words finally spoken. Frost rose slowly, crossed the short distance with his uneven step, and pressed his muzzle against Ezra's knee. Ezra laughed. It came out low and rusty, unused, but real. "Yeah," he said, placing one hand on Frost's head. "I'm still here." Frost leaned into the touch. Outside, snow continued to fall over Cedar Hollow. It covered the old tracks, the porch, the newly repaired rail, the place where Neil Harrow's footprints had once been. But this time the snow did not seem like a shroud. It seemed like paper, clean, wide, waiting. A place where a betrayed man and a forgotten German shepherd could begin, clumsily and faithfully, to write loyalty in a language neither of them had fully lost. Some promises are not written for applause. They are kept in quiet rooms, in cold storms, and in the small decisions no one else may ever see. Ezra did not become whole because he won a hearing. He began to heal because he chose not to look away. Frost reminded him that loyalty is not just staying when life is easy. Sometimes loyalty is calling a forgotten name, protecting a fragile life, and doing the right thing even when it costs you comfort. Maybe someone watching tonight is also carrying a silence, a loss, or an unfinished promise. May this story remind you that grace often begins with one small, faithful choice. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances still matter, please subscribe and walk with us into the next one. May peace find your home tonight, like a warm light in the snow.